Hello everyone, today we come to the next horror stories. Let's start. Story 1, Finding Mike. This story isn't mine, it's my aunt's. I'm going to tell it from her perspective. My husband, who I'll call Mike, and I had been dating for 4 years before finally deciding to tie the knot. Ours was a long-distance relationship, and the wedding was at his house, filled with family members who had helped make the day perfect. After the celebration, we finally got to bed around 1 a.m., exhausted. Mike was out cold within minutes. I was just about to drift off too, when I noticed something strange. From the corner of my eye, I saw a white figure floating toward me from the door. It was upright, but its feet weren't touching the ground. As it got closer, I could make out its face. It was a woman. Her eyes were pitch black, and her tongue hung unnaturally from her open mouth. My body froze in terror. I tried shaking Mike awake, but he wouldn't respond, no matter how hard I tried. Before I could react, the figure was right on top of me, her tongue almost brushing my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, terrified. Then, in a voice that wasn't spoken aloud but echoed in my mind, she demanded to know why I was in her bed and accused me of being with her man Mike. The fear was overwhelming, but I gathered enough courage to tell her that Mike was my husband. In an instant, I felt a violent shove, and I was thrown from the bed. I sat there on the floor, stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I think I stayed frozen there for what felt like forever. Eventually, I turned on the lights and tried waking Mike again, but he was too drunk to notice anything. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, watching TV until I finally fell asleep. But even sleep offered no escape. In my dreams, she appeared again, this time as a beautiful woman. She warned me, coldly, to stay away from Mike. The next morning, I told Mike what had happened, fully expecting him to think I was crazy. But to my shock, he admitted that he knew exactly who I had seen. The woman had been haunting him for 2 years. Every night, she would appear and lie beside him. He had hoped that by getting married, she would finally leave him alone. I was furious. We had been together for 4 years, and not once did he mention that he was being haunted by some ghost woman. That day, Mike's uncle came over and tied a red string around both our wrists. He handed us a Gerber baby bottle and instructed us to place it under our bed to keep the spirit hidden from us. That night, we both felt her presence in the room, but she couldn't show herself like she had before. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my arms tingled with fear, but at least we couldn't see her. She visited me in my dreams again that night, asking if I knew where Mike was. I told her I had no idea who she was looking for, but this was my bed now, and she needed to leave. She vanished, filled with rage. Over the next few months, we could still feel her presence occasionally, but she never harmed us or appeared like she did that first night. 9 months later, while we were visiting my parents out of state, Mike's cousins stayed at the house. They all claimed to have had the same dream, a beautiful woman asking them where she could find Mike. We no longer live in that house. We gave it to Mike's parents. To this day, anyone who sleeps downstairs says they are visited by her, sometimes as a beautiful woman, and sometimes as something much more horrifying. I had heard stories of spirits attaching themselves to people, but I never believed in them. Until it happened to me. In some cases, a simple red string or following instructions from a shaman or Buddhist monk can help. But if you fail to follow the rules or take the situation lightly, the spirit will come back, and when it does, it won't be so easy to make it leave. Story 2. Here's a story I found on an app that I thought was very interesting. I have been an avid swimmer and diver ever since I was in my late teens. As I got into various jobs out of high school, I never lost my enthusiasm for diving. So, when I had an opportunity to apply for a law enforcement-related diving job, I jumped for it. Not a lot of people are interested in a job that involves feeling around at the bottom of muddy lakes and streams for dead bodies. But I figured if it involved diving, I may as well put my hobby to good use. In the diving academy, where I had to go no matter how much experience I had, they taught us techniques for how to find things you're searching for underwater. It's not always bodies, you understand, sometimes it's guns, or stolen property, or cars. They taught us about currents, and eddies, and all those things that can affect where something will end up underwater. One of the trainees asked a question one day while we were preparing to get into our diving pool. He asked the instructor if it wasn't creepy underwater, with zero visibility, touching everything to see if it's a dead corpse. The instructor seemed a little amused, and yet he had a strange look on his face. "You don't know the half of it," he said. "We're dealing with people's fathers and brothers and sons down there, and we are always respectful and do our jobs with professionalism. When you're out there on the job, no matter what happens, you be just that, respectful and professional." The way he said it was odd. Like there was something he wanted to get across to us, but wasn't going to come right out and say it. What could I do? I shrugged and let myself fall backwards into the pool. And later in the year I was on the job. It was all routine for days. Then we got a call for a missing person and we were to search the bottom of a large pond. 3 of us were going into the water, with support personnel above. The officer assigned to give me my on-the-job training checked my equipment and guidelines. He knew this was my first body search, and though I tried to look confident and like I wasn't nervous, he must have known my true feelings. He took me a few steps off to the side. "Look," he told me. "There are things they don't teach you in school. If there's a girl down there, we'll find her. Don't worry about the mud and lack of visibility. Just stick close to me and learn, my friend." He slapped me on the shoulder and we were into the water. I was used to zero visibility. We had dived in our indoor pool with no lights on many times. Guidelines to the boats helped keep us oriented as to direction. And I kept one hand on my training officer's tank harness. I noticed after a while that he did not seem to be hugging the bottom, feeling around for arms and legs. Though I couldn't see, I had the distinct impression he was intentionally swimming a couple feet above the bottom, and I couldn't detect movement showing he was feeling around. I tried to feel around, though. My left hand and arm were constantly sweeping while I hung on tight with my right. I could tell he was running a good grid pattern, not missing any territory, covering an area thoroughly before moving to the next. What I didn't understand, unless I was just wrong, was why he would go back over the same area again several minutes later. Wasn't that a waste of time? And then I felt something. Was it a fish? The back of my hand hit something as I was waving it about. I reached back again. And then it happened. Something latched onto my left wrist with all its might. At first I thought it was the third diver, playing a joke on me. Then, to my horror, I realized it was not. This was a hand, all right, but it was cold and hard and held me in a death grip. I panicked. I admit it. I let go of my training officer and flipped over on my back and started thrashing with my free arm and both legs. I lost my breathing apparatus. All I wanted to do is rid myself of this thing hanging on to me. And it did let go. Before I could break free to the top and get some air and scream, my training officer grabbed back onto me. He quickly found and shoved my regulator into my mouth. And he wouldn't let me go until I quit thrashing and trying to get topside. When I calmed down, he made me grab onto his harness again. Then he circled around until he found what had grabbed onto me, the dead woman's corpse, which wasn't on the bottom but was floating a few feet above. Then we did our standard work, securing the body and getting her to the boat. On shore, this is what he told me: that woman did not grab your wrist. We swam around, stirred things up, got her body to float up off the bottom so we could find her easier. Your wrist happened to hit her hand just right and you snagged her. That's all. And then he told me the thing that no one talks about. He said, and the next time the same thing happens, you remember what I told you. And I have. 4 times now. Story 3. This event happened at my workplace, and while it might not sound scary to everyone, it really shook me up because, at the time, I was already dealing with strange, paranormal occurrences in my own room. However, this story took place at the Domino's where I work, and where I still work today. Domino's, where I work, is located at the corner of a street next to a small gas station where the city bus stop is. I had heard rumors about the gas station being haunted by an old woman who had passed away there years ago, around the time the Domino's first opened. I didn't pay much attention to the rumors, though. It felt like my coworkers were just trying to spook me because I was new. Fast forward about 3 or 4 months, I became assistant manager, which meant I had the responsibility of opening and closing the store. One evening, I was working my usual shift, and my manager asked me to close up because of a family emergency. It was always eerie being the one to close, especially since the only other employees were 2 delivery drivers who were often out on runs, leaving me alone in the store. That night, there was a rush, and I was by myself for almost 2 hours. I started hearing noises coming from the freezer, so I went to check. Everything seemed fine at first, but a few minutes later, I heard the same noise. This time, when I went back, the ingredients had been moved. The beef and pepperoni had switched places. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was a mistake I hadn't noticed earlier. But things got worse. Not long after, I heard a girl's scream coming from the freezer. I rushed over, and the place was a mess. Ingredients were scattered all over the floor. Now, the rumors began creeping back into my mind, and I couldn't shake the fear building up inside me. As I was cleaning up the mess, I heard the front door open. Assuming one of my drivers had returned, I yelled out, "Hey! Watch the store while I take out the trash." Without looking, I grabbed the trash and headed outside. It was oddly chilly, especially for a summer night. I noticed a girl standing near the bus station, which was strange since it was around 1 a.m. and the buses had stopped running by midnight. As I got closer to her, I realized my driver wasn't back yet because his car wasn't in the lot, and when I looked through the window, I saw no one inside. I should have heard the door chime if anyone had entered or left, but there was only silence. I turned back to the girl, still standing there, and I called out, "Hey! The buses don't run this late. You need to leave." She didn't respond. I got closer, warning her again that if she didn't leave, I'd have to call the cops. Suddenly, I heard footsteps running towards me, and before I knew it, she was just 2 feet away, staring straight at me, not saying a word. That's when it hit me this wasn't just any girl. She was the one from the rumors, the one who had been haunting the gas station. And she was the same person whose scream I'd heard in the freezer earlier. Frozen with fear, I turned around and ran as fast as I could back to the store. Halfway there, I heard a car horn. One of the delivery drivers had finally returned, scaring the woman off. I don't know if this sounds scary to you, but for me, it was terrifying. The fact that, at the same time, I was being haunted by a woman in my own bedroom who looked just like the one I saw that night made it all the more real. I still work at that same Domino's, but after that experience, I will never close the store again. Story 4. When I was expecting my first son, my sisters threw me a baby shower at my in-laws' house. One of my friends from work, Angela, who is white, came to the shower. It was a typical baby shower: games, food, and gifts. The event ended without any issues, and everything seemed perfectly normal. The following Monday, I was at work having lunch with Angela, and we started chatting about the baby shower. She told me she had a great time and loved the food. Then, she mentioned something that caught me off guard. She said she was surprised that my mom understood English, even though she hadn't heard her speak any English during the entire event. I was confused and told her, my mom wasn't at the baby shower. The only older woman there was my mother-in-law, and she doesn't understand any English. Angela seemed shocked and insisted that there had been another middle-aged mum woman at the shower. I told her again that the only older woman present was my mother-in-law, and she wasn't around 40-50 years old as Angela described. But Angela was sure. She described the woman, slim, with neck-length black hair, wearing a floral print shirt and a long skirt. She said the woman had sat near my two sisters-in-law, played games with them, and even got in line for food, smiling and interacting with everyone. Angela was certain this woman had been a part of the shower the entire time, cheering and clapping when I opened gifts, acting like any other guest. Her story sent chills down my spine. My in-laws' house had always felt strange to me. The room my husband and I stayed in was always freezing, no matter how warm the rest of the house was, even during California summers. I once had a dream where an elderly woman told me that the room was cold because she had died in it. I often woke up at 3:30 a.m. to prepare lunch for my husband, who left for work at 5 a.m. Every time I was alone in the kitchen, I could feel the hairs on my neck stand up. I was too afraid to look around, feeling like someone was watching me, so I would hum quietly to myself and hurry through my tasks. After we moved out, my brother-in-law and his wife moved into that room. One day, she randomly recorded a video on her phone while inside the room. When she looked back at the video, she noticed a dark figure in the footage. She couldn't figure out what it was, but it scared her enough that she immediately deleted the video. Thinking back to the baby shower, I couldn't recall any other woman being there with my sisters-in-law. It was just the two of them, and they were partnered up for the games. I asked my sister to check the photos she had taken during the event, hoping to see if this mysterious woman appeared in any of them. My sister said there was nothing unusual in the pictures, just some odd light spots here and there, but no woman matching Angela's description. I told my husband about what Angela had seen, and he mentioned it to my father-in-law. His response sent another chill down my spine. He calmly said, "Angela has never been to our house, so the lady let her see her. Angela wouldn't know that she wasn't human. We shouldn't worry about it, she isn't hurting us. Let her be, as she is letting us be." My in-laws still live in that house. According to my father-in-law, shamans aren't afraid of the supernatural because spirits have no power over them. Story 5. This story was told by my mom, but I'll be the narrator. Side note, I didn't experience any paranormal activity, but everyone else in the family did. It happened in 1991 at a big haunted house in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm not exactly sure where, but my parents bought one of those large, beautiful houses in a wealthy area. Only my mom, dad, grandma, dad's mom, my sister, and I lived there. My sister was 2, and I was just an infant. It all started after we moved in and got settled. Since there were so many rooms, I got my own room with a crib, and my sister had her own playroom. My mom, who was young and didn't work, would watch us while she went to school. My sister was the first to experience something strange. Being a kid, she would talk to herself and play alone in her playroom. One day, my mom was watching TV when she suddenly heard my sister running down the hallway. My sister rushed into the living room and sat next to her, breathing hard and wide-eyed, like she'd seen a ghost. My mom asked what was wrong, but my sister didn't say a word. She was always quiet and kept to herself. After that, things seemed fine for a while. My aunt moved to town to be near us, and my grandma went to visit her one night. We all went except for my mom, who stayed home to finish homework. She was working in her room with just a desk lamp on, so it was pretty dark. Out of nowhere, she heard plates dropping in the kitchen, but none broke. The sound kept going, like when a plate rolls on its side. Then, when the noise finally stopped, another plate would drop. Scared, my mom decided to go to bed, pulling the covers over her head. Then she heard footsteps coming from the kitchen and moving slowly toward her bedroom door. The door creaked open, and the footsteps came closer to her bed. My mom was so terrified she held her breath. After about 30 seconds of silence, something yanked the cover off and slapped her. She said it felt like it nearly knocked the life out of her. She turned on the light, but no one was there. She stayed up all night with the lights on, waiting for everyone to return. When she heard a car pull up, she ran outside to meet them and told them what happened, but they didn't think much of it. That same night, while everyone was asleep, my grandma was the next target. She dreamed of an old woman in a long, old-fashioned dress with a large bun in her hair, wrinkled and aged. In the dream, the white lady told my grandma, "Get your family and leave my house now." My grandma replied, "No, you're dead. You need to move on." The lady suddenly screamed, "Get out now," and slapped my grandma, just as she had done to my mom. My grandma started screaming for my dad, and everyone woke up. She told my dad what had happened and confirmed that what my mom experienced was real. They all went to my aunt's house that night, without packing anything. A couple of weeks later, my dad and 3 friends went hunting and caught a few deer. My dad decided to use the basement of the house to skin them. As they worked, one of his friends asked, "Is the house really haunted?" My dad replied, "I don't know. That's what my mom and wife say. They keep seeing ghosts, but I've never experienced anything." Right after he said that, they heard loud stomping upstairs, like someone angrily walking back and forth. My dad looked around, and all 3 of his friends were with him in the basement. Scared, they raced upstairs and out of the house, leaving the deer behind. My dad said each time the white lady stomped, dust would fall from the ceiling. Another side story about the house, my mom told me she always felt like she was being watched whenever she went into the basement, so she would hurry back upstairs. Creepy, right? I was too young to remember anything, but my sister does recall seeing a white lady in her playroom. I'm not sure if the house still exists in Green Bay, but my family truly believes it was haunted. Thanks for reading, and sorry it's so long. Oh, and I almost forgot the most important part, the person who sold the house to my parents knew it was haunted. He knew the story of the lady who used to live there. She had lived in the house all her life and died there. Years later, the house was put up for sale, but the woman cherished her home so much that she haunted it to keep outsiders away. At one point, the house was a hotel, which explains the many bedrooms. The basement was once a bar and poker area, which also explains why my mom felt like she was being watched down there. Story 6. This story was told to me by a close friend. Apologies if it's a bit long. Some may find it scary, while others might not. My friend used to work at a sushi restaurant in Woodbury, Minnesota, called Akita. For those of you in the area, you probably know the place. There's a break room in the back where the employees go for lunch. One day, while my friend was on her lunch break, she accidentally dropped some food on the floor. Not thinking much of it, she threw it away and went on with her day. A few nights later, she came home around 2 a.m. Everyone was asleep, and she settled on the couch to unwind before bed. As she sat there, the notebooks on the coffee table began flipping through pages on their own. Then, she heard movement from the kitchen like someone was touching the dishes on the drying rack. Scared, she decided to sleep under the shrine in her living room for the night. While lying there, wrapped in a blanket, she began hearing the sound of footsteps running around her and the shrine's small, quick steps, like those of a child. Days passed, and one evening while she was showering, something tugged at the shower curtain. Peeking around the edge, it seemed like a little girl was playing peekaboo with her. My friend hadn't told anyone about these strange occurrences yet. A month later, she and her parents took a trip to California to visit their grandparents. One afternoon, while cooking in the kitchen, she saw something move out of the corner of her eye. Startled, she accidentally spilled hot oil, burning her hand. As she bandaged the burn, her uncle approached and asked what had happened. She brushed it off as an accident, but her uncle pressed, sensing something was wrong. Finally, she confided in him that she believed something had been following her. She had even seen it in the house earlier, which caused her to get burned. Her uncle, who happened to be a shaman, smiled and said he had sensed the presence since they'd arrived. He prepared a small ceremony and began asking her questions about where she worked and what had been going on. When she told him about working at the restaurant, he asked if she had dropped any food recently. She admitted that she had only a few times. Her uncle revealed that the spirit following her was that of a little girl, around 8 to 10 years old. She had been following my friend because she was the only one who had fed her by dropping food on the ground. The girl's spirit wanted to be her friend. He also told her that this girl had been murdered long ago, near the water fountain in the back of what is now Akita, before the restaurant and other buildings were constructed. She didn't mean any harm, she just wanted companionship. To help the spirit move on, her uncle advised her to take off her shoes and wear them backward, Rao Kao Pojn Sug, at the airport or when she returned home. This, he said, would confuse the spirit and prevent her from following my friend any further. My friend followed his instructions, and after that, the strange occurrences stopped. She continued working at Akita for several more years. This story happened some time ago, but the little girl's spirit remains lost. I hope she finds peace one day. Story 7, The Uber Driver. When my father passed away in August 2016, it was sudden and devastating. I was teaching abroad at the time, and the news hit me hard. Growing up, my dad and I had been close, but as I got older, our relationship became strained. He cheated on my mom multiple times, which eventually led to their divorce. Afterward, my siblings and I distanced ourselves from him, partly due to the trauma of intimate partner violence and the stigma from our paternal relatives, who gossiped about our mother being a divorced Hmong woman. Anyone who's experienced grief knows how overwhelming it can be. One moment you're fine, and the next, you're in tears. When you're grieving, your spirit is weakened, leaving you more vulnerable to bad energy or the spirit world. After my dad's funeral, I began hearing the keej, a traditional Hmong reed pipe, playing softly at night, along with distant weeping. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the mind, assuming I was simply overwhelmed by sadness. But when my sisters and I all mentioned hearing the same thing, I knew something wasn't right. For a while, we all stayed together at my sister's apartment, which gave us some comfort. Each morning, we'd talk about hearing the keej playing in the middle of the night. There was a sinister feeling attached to it, as if something dark was taunting us. One night, while sharing the guest room with one of my sisters, she suddenly woke me up. She whispered that she could feel someone else in the room, and she heard a breath. The room was pitch black, but I instantly felt the same evil presence. My heart raced, and the hair on my arms stood up. I pulled the blankets over us and told her to go back to sleep, though I was terrified myself. I didn't want to scare her even more by admitting that I felt it too. Whatever was in the room seemed to want us to acknowledge it, but I refused. I started silently chanting, angrily telling it to go away. Eventually, I fell asleep. Months later, after graduating with my bachelor's degree, I decided to treat myself to a solo night out. The stress of school, combined with grieving my dad, had taken a toll on me. Since I didn't have my driver's license, I took an Uber to the mall. I had dinner, watched a movie, and around 11 p.m. I ordered another Uber to head home. The driver, a middle-aged Hmong man, seemed friendly enough. We made small talk, and he told me about his kids. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Is anyone in your family a shaman?" I was caught off guard but replied honestly, "No, but my family thinks it might be me or my oldest sister. I'm not sure, though. My dad passed away a few months ago, and ever since, my spirit has felt weak." I've had some supernatural experiences, but I just chalked it up to grief. There was a long pause, and I assumed the conversation was over. But then he said, I asked because I can hear your plague your soul whispering in my ear. A chill ran down my spine. He continued, I think you might become a shaman, but not in the traditional sense. You'll help people when they're sick and speak an ancient language. Was your dad's name Beher? And didn't he love soccer and coach at Hmong tournaments? I was stunned. He'd guessed my dad's name correctly. Yes, I replied. The driver nodded. Wow, I went to high school with your dad, but we lost touch. I'm sorry to hear he passed. I didn't know how to respond. It felt surreal that this man had known my father. He went on to tell me he was a shaman and offered to read my palm. By now, we were almost at my house. I remembered my grandma and mom warning me never to let just anyone read my palm. Some people might have ill intentions, using black magic or cursing you. I grew more anxious, my heart pounding as we neared my home. When he parked, he turned toward me, extending his hand. I can read your palm now. Panicking, I opened the car door and quickly said, no, I've changed my mind. He stared at me blankly for a moment, then smiled. Okay, that's fine. Have a good night. I watched as he drove away, clutching my keys tightly. As I hurried to unlock the door, I felt a breeze and heard the distant sound of the key again, followed by a soft whistle. I froze for a second before rushing inside. Once safely in, I called my sister and told her what had happened. Whatever had whistled or played the key didn't feel right, it felt like a warning. I later told my mom and uncle, who is a shaman, about the encounter. They reassured me not to dwell on it, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to it. They suspect I might be a rising shaman, and they've warned me to always keep my guard up. Since I was a child, I've had supernatural experiences, but since my dad's passing, they've intensified. I often have dreams where spirits visit me, usually in a house made of dirt. The house is part of a grassy hill, almost like a grave. I recognize it every time. Story 8, The Dragon of 8th Street Park. It was sometime in the 90s, at a park in Stockton, California. I can't recall the exact name, but we always called it 8th Street Park. It was tucked near the I-5 freeway, with a soccer field, restrooms, playgrounds, and a river that wound lazily along the top of a hill. It was the kind of place where people gathered on weekends to gamble, sell food, and let their families relax. It was a slice of life, simple, familiar, carefree. We used to go there often with my parents. Dad would gamble while Mom gossiped with her friends. The kids? We roamed free, without a worry, lost in our games. That particular day stands out in my memory. The sky was clear, the breeze gentle. The air smelled like roses opening, the kind of scent that makes you want to lay down, close your eyes, and let the world pass by. With my eyes closed, I could hear the hum of life, children laughing, cars rolling past, and the soft clatter of dice hitting the ground. But nature had its own plans. An hour later, clouds drifted in, and the first drops of rain tapped gently on the ground. The sun retreated, and the atmosphere shifted. My peaceful moment shattered, I decided to climb the hill to look at the river. When I reached the top, the view was breathtaking. The river shimmered below, but something felt off. The water was rising, slow but steady, like how it creeps up when you slip into a bathtub. A few adults and other kids had gathered nearby, and despite the rain intensifying, I stayed put, my curiosity growing. Suddenly, one of the adults shouted, "Snake! Snake!" Instinctively, I glanced down at the ground, but there was no snake. Then I looked at the river. There, slithering down the water's surface, was an enormous snake, its body thick, powerful, and impossibly long. It moved fast, cutting through the current like it belonged there. The others scattered in panic, but I stood rooted to the spot, frozen by fear. Sitting on the snake's head was a woman. She was calm, and standing tall. Slowly, she turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and though she said nothing aloud, I understood her perfectly. Don't be afraid. I'm looking for someone. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, the snake and the woman disappeared down the river, swallowed by the rushing water. My mom must have heard the commotion because she found me standing there on the hill. She grabbed my hand, her voice frantic. "Did you see something?" she asked. I shook my head and lied, "No." But then I whispered, "We shouldn't come back to this park for a while." About a week or two later, 3 kids drowned in that river. I never found out why or how, but I've never forgotten what the woman told me. Story 9, Soulmates Beyond the Grave. This is a story from something I experienced last year while living in my own apartment. In 2023, I moved out and lived 15 minutes away from my family. I was going through a rough patch working 2 jobs back to back, reflecting on my life as a daughter, and struggling with other stressors. I didn't have much time for myself and barely went out, but I kept pushing through. One night, I had a dream that still lingers in my mind. I dreamt that I went to a party with 2 cousins I'm close with and some friends. In the dream, I felt the same sadness I carried in real life, but I masked it with a smile. While we were drinking, 2 Hmong guys showed up. One was about 5'8" slim, medium build, with short hair and shaved sides. The other was around 5'6", a bit heavier, with longer hair and a small mustache. They looked like they were in their mid-20s. Let's call the taller one Ko and the shorter one Teng. We hit it off, and I started hanging out with them regularly. We'd go out to eat, talk, and have fun. It felt like they had become a part of my life. Eventually, my cousins and I met up again at a house to plan another party. I brought Ko and Ting along, but when I mentioned them to my cousins, the conversation took a strange turn. Me, is it cool if Ko and Ting come to the party too? Cousin 1, who's that? Me, the guys who came last time. We partied with them, and you even hung out with them. Cousin 2, who are you talking about? We don't remember anyone like that. I pointed directly at Ko and Teng, who were standing right next to me. Me, these guys. How could you not remember? They're right here. My cousins exchanged confused glances. Cousin 1, who are you pointing at? We don't see anyone. I turned to Ko and Teng, apologizing for my cousin's weird behavior. That's when Ko said something that made my dream feel unnervingly real. He looked at me with a gentle expression and said, "It's okay. People don't remember us after a certain amount of time." Then he added something that shook me to my core, "To be honest, I came here to take you. Teng is my cousin, and he's here to help me. But I've realized it's not your time yet." I felt a cold wave of shock. I suddenly knew what was happening, but before I could react, Ko said something even more heartbreaking, "I love you. We are soulmates, but Teng and I died too early. I came to take you with me, but now I see that it's not your time. I'll let you live your life. Don't be sad." I woke up immediately, my heart racing. I didn't know whether to cry because of what he said or out of fear that I had almost been taken in my sleep alone in my apartment where no one would have known. Sometimes I still think about what Ko said, "It's not your time." Even though I've struggled with depression, his words remind me that I have my family, my new husband, and a future worth living for. I remind myself not to stay out late or be alone when I'm feeling sad. I was lucky that night, and it's an experience I never want to repeat. I'm grateful Ko and Ting didn't take me, because if they had, I would have missed out on so much: my loving husband, my new family, and the opportunities that came after that dream. Story 10, The Infamous Basement of Golden Harvest. Hey everyone, I'd like to share an encounter of mine when I worked at Golden Harvest. For those who don't know, it's a Mung grocery store located on the east side of St. Paul, Minnesota. I was employed there a few years back as an inventory stocker. It was about my second month when other employees started telling me about paranormal activities that supposedly happen in the store's basement, back when there weren't bathrooms upstairs. The stories ranged from hearing footsteps like high heels to seeing a little girl. Knowing me, I believe in ghosts, so I didn't mess with that kind of stuff. I tried my very best not to go down there unless I absolutely had to. But being a stalker, it was almost always necessary, unfortunately. Anyway, about another month passed after hearing those stories. On a normal day at work, I got my hands dirty and needed to wash them, along with my coworker, who needed to use the bathroom. But the upstairs bathroom was occupied. We couldn't wait, so we decided to head downstairs. Me, let's go downstairs, I just need to wash my hands. Friend, no way. Me, what's wrong with you? I'll wait for you. Friend, okay, let's go. Taking the risk, we both headed downstairs. We were careful with every step we took. The staircase had about 20 steps or so, and you had to make a right into the long hallway to get to the bathrooms. Now, Golden Harvest doesn't have the best lighting down there. There weren't any lights except in the hallway, and even that was dim. We reached the men's bathroom, which also had a dim light. My friend waited outside the bathroom as I quickly washed my hands. We swapped places, and before my friend closed the bathroom door. Me, hurry up. Friend, yeah, I'll be quick. Closes door. As soon as that door closed shut, it all started. The bathroom door was to my right. I was leaning against the wall behind me. The hallway we came from was also to my right. To my left was a pitch-black room we called the chicken coop. It didn't have solid walls but had fenced walls like an actual chicken coop. And, just as the employees had told me, I heard footsteps. The sound came from my left, like it started right at the chicken coop door, which was open. The footsteps passed right by me and faded into the hallway click-clack, click-clack. And you know how you can feel the presence when someone walks by? Yep, I felt that. By that time, I was already scared out of my mind. My body froze, and I became numb. The footsteps started again, but this time they were coming from farther inside the chicken coop. They came closer and closer to the door and then stopped. I looked up but didn't see anything. Now I was seriously freaked out. I remembered what older folks always say, just act like you aren't scared or bothered by it. So that's exactly what I did. I acted like I wasn't hearing anything and just stared at the ground in front of me. Then something even more terrifying happened, the sound of a chain being played with, like someone was yanking it back and forth. I thought to myself, oh no, there's a chain on the chicken coop door. The chicken coop was about 5 feet away from me, so the noise was loud. But again, I tried to ignore it. You can bet I was picturing a girl standing by the door playing with that chain, though. The noise lasted about 10 seconds, then it stopped. It felt like it was angry at me for not paying attention because the sound of the chain returned, but this time it was right next to my ear. It was super loud. All I could picture was that little girl next to me, yanking the chain close to my ear. I didn't dare to look. My friend finally opened the door, and everything stopped. It felt like something had released its hold on my body. All of this probably happened within 5 to 8 minutes, but it felt like hours. My friend and I just looked at each other but didn't say a word. We just stared and walked right back upstairs. I later told him what had happened, and he replied, yeah, I heard the same thing outside the bathroom. After that, I worked there for 2 more years but only went back down there about 5 more times. It was probably the scariest experience I've ever had. Another time, I was working in the back room crushing boxes with a machine. It was at night, and for those reading this who have worked at Golden Harvest, you know how packed it gets with boxes. I was minding my business, and as I reached down to grab a box, I quickly saw a face between a gap in the boxes. I jumped a little, and the face disappeared. I don't know if I was imagining things or not, but yeah, creepy stuff. A lot of my friends have experienced even scarier things there than I have, but those are their stories to tell. Anyone else with Golden Harvest paranormal activity stories? Story 11, My Brother. This isn't a scary story, but it's something strange I experienced. My husband and I were staying with my mom for a few months so I could go back to school. We lived in an upstairs apartment with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, one in my mom's room and one in the hallway. I remember it was the night before Thanksgiving. I had gotten home from school about an hour or 2 before my siblings, and my mom asked me to pack clothes for my brother and herself. They were leaving for Sacramento after she got off work to spend Thanksgiving there. I couldn't go because my husband was working late that night. As I busied myself gathering blankets and pillows, my sisters came home. I told them to pack their things while I went to my mom's room to use the bathroom. When I came out, I saw my brother sitting on his bed, looking sad. I started picking out clothes for him and asked, "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. I looked at him again and asked, "What's wrong?" He just looked down and shrugged, still silent. I thought he was upset about having to leave, so I continued packing. When I finished, he was still sitting there. As I walked out, I asked, "You're not coming?" He shook his head no. I went to the kitchen to make food, and after I finished cooking, I asked one of my sisters to go get our brother. She turned to me and said, "He's not home yet. Mom called earlier and said he's with his dad. She's going to pick him up after work." I froze. I had just been talking to him in his room. Confused, I told her what had happened. She looked at me like I was losing it and said, "Maybe you're just imagining things." But I knew what I saw. I had sat right next to him and spoken to him. Later that night, when my mom and brother finally got home, I asked him, "You were in your room earlier, right?" He looked at me, confused, and said, "No, I was with Dad. He picked me up from school." I wasn't scared, but I was definitely confused. After my mom and siblings left for Sacramento, the house didn't feel right. I had goosebumps all over, like someone was still there with me. I stayed up all night, waiting for my husband to come home from work. To this day, I don't know why I saw my brother or what he wanted. But later, my mom told me something chilling. She had had an abortion before my brother was born, and an old woman once told her that there was a little boy following her. He wanted to be born and had chosen her to be his mother. Story 12, The Red Orb. This story takes place in the old days when houses in Japan still used paper walls and doors. A young businessman was traveling through a quiet town after a long, hard day of work. He thought he could make it home before nightfall, but darkness crept in faster than expected. Not wanting to turn back and waste time looking for shelter in town, he decided to press on, hoping to find a place to stay further down the road. Luckily, he spotted a faint light glimmering in the distance. He followed it off the road and came upon a small hut. He knocked on the door, and an elderly man greeted him. "Can I help you?" The old man asked. "Would you be so kind as to let me stay for the night?" "I'm willing to pay for a room," the young man said. "Nonsense," the old man replied. "I don't get many visitors out here. You're welcome to stay. Come on in." The old man served him food and showed him to a spare room. As they walked down the narrow hall, the young man noticed another room right next to his. Thanking the old man for his kindness, he entered his room and settled in. After blowing out the candle, he lay down to sleep. But before long, a soft, melodic sound floated through the walls. It sounded like someone was singing. Curious, the young man crawled to the wall and wet his finger, poking a small hole through the thin rice paper. He peered through the hole and saw a beautiful woman, her long black hair cascading over one side of her face, dancing gracefully while singing softly. He pulled away from the wall, puzzled. Why hadn't the old man introduced them? He decided to take another look. This time, though, all he saw was a red glow. No woman, just an eerie, pulsating light. Confused, he convinced himself it must have been a dream and went back to bed. The next morning, the old man invited him to breakfast. As they sat together, the young man couldn't help but ask, who was the woman in the room next to mine last night? She was singing and dancing. The old man's face grew pale. There's no one in that room, he said quietly. That was my daughter's room. Until she died. She was born with a disfigurement and could never find a suitor to marry her. She took her own life in that room. The young man's heart sank. What was her disfigurement? The old man looked down at the table before answering. She was born with one red eye. Story 13, The Possession. Has anyone experienced a real-life situation involving possession? I always thought that only happened in movies, but I was wrong. 5 years ago, my boyfriend had a friend named Tu who was a shaman. He and his girlfriend lived with my boyfriend's brother and sister-in-law at the time. One evening, I received a call from the girlfriend, who insisted that my boyfriend and I come over immediately. She wouldn't explain why. I was out with friends, but I canceled my plans and went straight to their house. My boyfriend was already there when I arrived. As soon as I walked in, I saw Tu sitting on the sofa with his eyes closed, rocking back and forth. Not knowing what was happening, he suddenly stood up and tried to grab me with his eyes still closed. My boyfriend and his brother held him back and took him back to the sofa. I ran into the kitchen where the girlfriend and sister-in-law were, and I asked them what was going on. That's when they told me that Tu was possessed. Then Tu began saying, "Come here, little girl," and started to whistle. He followed it up with, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to come get you, and tried to come toward me in the kitchen again. The girls and I got scared and ran into the bedroom. The girlfriend told me I should light 2 joss sticks and say that I had just arrived and hadn't done anything, asking why he was doing this to me. I was terrified but decided to follow her advice. I left the bedroom, lit 2 joss sticks, and said what the girlfriend told me as quickly as I could. Just as I finished, Tu lunged for me, but instead caught the edge of the sofa and said in a deep voice, "Because your soul is mine." I ran back to the bedroom and slammed the door behind me. We girls stayed in the bedroom, waiting and trying to figure out what to do next. After about 5 minutes, it seemed like everything was back to normal, so we cautiously emerged from the bedroom and asked if Tu knew what had happened. He said it felt like he had just been sleeping. I then asked them what really went down, and here's how it started. Tu and his girlfriend had gotten into an argument before everything happened. He was sitting on the sofa when, out of nowhere, he dropped to the floor, lay on his back, and started pounding his heels back and forth, side to side. Then he stood up, grabbed a small blanket from the sofa, put it over his head, and started spinning in circles. After that, he took the blanket off and climbed back onto the sofa, tiptoeing along the edge without falling. The entire time, his eyes were closed, and he didn't say a word until I arrived. The sofa wasn't against the wall at all, and they insisted there was no way anyone could have tiptoed on the edge without falling. That was when my boyfriend arrived, and he and his brother had to hold Tu down on the sofa. I looked at the back of the sofa and noticed finger marks running down it, like how you can see the difference in color when you run your fingers across carpet. My boyfriend said Tu's strength was so immense that both of them could barely keep him restrained. That was my first and last experience with something like this. Story 14, Apartment C. This story is about something terrifying that happened at my sister's old apartment 6 years ago. She had been living in that apartment for quite a while, and every now and then something creepy would happen. For example, one day I was alone in the house and I would hear someone calling my name. Not once, but multiple times. I thought maybe my sister just got home, but when I looked around the apartment I saw no one else. This happened a couple more times throughout the rest of our stay at this apartment. The next thing that happened was our dog would randomly start growling at the wall. After we told my mom about it, she suggested that we put one of the blessed piece of cloth on the wall. So we did that and the dog stopped growling at the wall. Fast forward a couple months later, I was alone at the house with the dog. It was late at night and we were about to go to sleep. I was about to let the dog go use the bathroom outside when the dog just stopped right in front of the glass door, and growled and barked like crazy. I thought maybe he saw someone walking in the backyard. Since it was an apartment complex, anyone could just walk across our little section of yard, but when I looked out the door I didn't see a thing. He kept growling and barking and wouldn't go outside to use the bathroom. I got a little freaked out, so I just closed the door and pulled the blinds. I was starting to freak out, so I didn't go to sleep. I decided to sit on the couch and watch TV. Not even 5 minutes had passed and the dog started growling at the wall. It wasn't the usual growl that he did at the wall. It was more fierce and loud. He started barking and howling. He looked like he was about to attack the wall. The thing that freaked me out the most though was when I saw all his hairs stand up on his body. I instantly knew it was about to get real. I got so scared and jumped over the kitchen table, and grabbed the dog and left. I waited until my sister got back to go and get my things. When we went back, the blessed piece of cloth was on the ground about 5 feet from the wall. We didn't know what to do, so we just moved out of that apartment. Story 15, Dad. I was only 17 when my dad laid breathless on his hospice bed. His pale skin was brighter than ever. He had a smile that can say 1,000 words. His coloration finally came back. He actually looked happy. The bed was in the middle of the living room. His last request was to be with the family and not at the hospital. My mom, brothers, and sisters all surrounded the bed in tears as we knew my dad had left us that morning. I was glad that he was finally freed from the cancer he had been battling for half of his life. No more needles, no more medication, and last, no more suffering. At first, Dad's death didn't hit me at all. I remember when my dad was still alive, the house was more lively. He would yell and scold at the family for everything or anything. I used to get annoyed, but now, there's no more yelling or screaming. No one seems to care anymore. It was just a quiet house. I would give anything to just have the family back to normal. All my mom does now was stare through the patio doors in confusion. She seemed to be spaced out from the family. Everyone seemed to be in their own little world. I have never felt this lost in life. I didn't shed a tear on the day he left our family nor at the funeral. But now, tears quietly rolls down my cheeks. For once, I was so confused and lost in life. My dad's death finally hits hard months after his funeral. I remember that day, it was a quiet evening as the sun started to set. I couldn't explain my emptiness. I just missed my dad so much. I went to the backyard where my dad used to do his gardening. But now the garden was covered with overgrown weeds. I sat by the stumps overlooking the garden. My eyes were blurred by my river of tears as the sun slowly fades in the horizon. A cool breeze out of nowhere surrounded me. Goosebumps filled my skin as I stare at the last glimpse of light. Movements at the corner of the garden distracted me. I looked away from the sun to see a person pulling weeds. I stood up, rubbing my blurred eyes frantically. Refocusing to the corner of the garden was nothing. I sighed to myself, thinking of false hope in seeing my dad again. I wiped my tears away as the sun disappeared from the horizon. Darkness started to fill the sky as I told myself it was time to go inside. But before I went inside, I had to wipe away my tears as I didn't want anyone to know that I was crying. As I wiped my tears, I felt a soft tap to my shoulder. I turned around to see my dad. I was lost for words. Tears filled my eyes as my body hugged him in happiness. He was cold to the touch. He didn't show any emotions. I was confused in happiness. All I could ask was, "Dad, is this really you?" The man that looked like my dad just nodded. He wore the same dirty blue button shirt and dress pants that my dad used to wear when he's out gardening. There were so much emotions running through me. I didn't know if I was dreaming or actually seeing him. I was not sure if I should have been scared or happy. I had so many things to tell him, but words were fumbling out from my mouth. With his cold 2 fingers, he reached towards my lips and said, "Shh, my son, please be quiet. If you love me, please take me home as I am hungry and need some food." I didn't know how to answer him. If he's really my dad, why would I say no? I turned to the man and said, "Dad, follow me." I was confused. I'm not sure if I was dreaming or if this was real. Either way, I'm sure everyone would be happy to see him. I walked to the front door of the house with him following close behind in the shadows. As I opened the screen door to the house, I was met by a set of hard knuckles to my forehead. Blop! Hitting me squarely between my eyes. Me, being surprised by the hit, I crouched down in reaction with both of my arms covering my head. Me, expecting a second hit that never came. I looked up to see my mom in fear and anger. "Son, I am your real mom. The thing you have with you is not your dad." My mom screaming, "Whatever you are, if you come in my home and harm my family, I'll make sure you burn in hell." I was now scared and confused. I was afraid to look behind me. I just wanted to run inside my home and hide behind my mom. My mom then said, "Son, don't be scared. I am here for you, but you cannot come inside the house at the moment. Wait here and I'll come back out." I watched my mom turn away and close the door on me. I sat in the darkness alone that felt like an eternity. My face now filled with tears again, but this time it was not tears of sadness, it was tears of fear. At first I was too scared to turn around to see if that thing was still behind me. My body still filled with goosebumps and a never-ending chill. After a while, I toughed through it and slowly turned behind me. There, I saw that thing hiding in the dark shadows. Its eyes were as bright as stars in the night sky looking through me. Its eyes pierced my heart, squeezing my chest in pain and caused each breath to be shorter than the last. Seeing it waving its arm for me to go to him. It then said, "Son, come over here," as its arm was still waving me over. I felt as my heart had stopped and I tried hard to take a deep gasp of air. The thing said, "Son, don't fight it. Come with me." I swallowed whatever air I can and screamed my lungs out in fear, "Mom, quick, I can't wait for you any longer." My eyes were locked onto its eyes. I wanted to turn away from it, but my body was frozen. I felt as life was slowly draining away from me, and that was when I heard the door open. My mom yelled out, "Leave my son and our family alone. If you are not part of the living, then you need to leave this world." My mom quickly wrapped a red and black string around my neck and pulled me inside the house. The chest pain was finally relieved and I was able to breathe again. All I could do was cry in my mom's arm. I knew she was scared too as she was crying holding to me. All my brothers and sisters were all scared looking at the both of us from the living room. Days later, a shaman came to Ua for what had happened to me. He confirmed that it was a lost spirit. That spirit wanted company and saw that I was vulnerable. My mom said she heard me crying in the backyard. She then saw me talking nobody and saw that I was hugging nothing. As my mom looked closer, she saw a dark figure that was not human-like following me to the door, and that was when she stopped me. The shaman then told the whole family, "Your dad had left peacefully. You all need to accept that and move on. As human beings, we have to accept life and death. We need to stop mourning for the dead, as we may invite unknown entities." I have never thought I would be this down in my life. I knew my dad's time was coming up and was prepared for his death. But it was actually the months afterwards that I was not prepared for. I lived in denial and mourned longer than any of my family. This was my awakening to accept that my dad went peacefully to a better place. I have learned to accept that and moved on. Story 16, Hide and Seek, or Is It Peek? When I was about 9 years old, I tagged along with my parents to a funeral for a distant grandfather. While at the funeral home, I got bored and decided to play hide and seek with the other children there. I know, bad idea. But at the time, I was only 8 years old, and wasn't thinking logically. I remembered we played hide and seek for about 30 minutes, and I was yet to be it. I thought I was so clever, because I was hiding in very inconspicuous places. Behind the doors, behind the couches the elders were sitting on, even in my parents' car. When one of the older children became it, he vowed to find me since I was yet to be it. I was excited with the fact that this boy called me out, so I tried to think of the most secretive spot I could hide. I decided the bathroom was a great place to go, and headed downstairs to the basement section of the funeral home. Something lured me to go down there, but I didn't know it at the time. Once downstairs, I noticed there was a little lounge for those who were waiting for others in the bathroom. The bathrooms downstairs were down a narrow corridor, and then there was a set of stainless steel doors that swung out both ways. Upon pushing the doors, I noticed it was left unlocked, and decided to go behind there to hide. Once I walked into the room with the stainless steel doors, I noticed there was a curtain blocking the rest of the room. The curtain had been drawn so that curious people peeping in the stainless steel doors windows would not see the horror that lay behind. I rushed past the curtains to look for an even more clever spot to hide. I stumbled upon the room that the deceased are dissected and cleaned, and strategically positioned dead bodies were placed all over the room, as if they were still alive. To my horror, there was an old man, positioned with his belly down, ribs cut open and flipped outwards. He was suspended on metal hooks from the ceiling, and his arms were outstretched as if he were still alive and trying to catch me. His face was contorted to an ugly, hideous grin. It was apparent rigor mortis had set in, and he was staying in that position until moved. The old man did not yet have any makeup on, and his face had a pasty gray pallor. His lips were purple, and there were a few bruises on his body. I tried to muster up a scream, only to let out a pathetic yelp. I was petrified. To my left, there was a beautiful blonde woman who was positioned into a sitting position with her right leg crossed over her left. She was leaning on another stainless steel table with her right elbow propped up, holding a cigarette and smiling. She too was naked. This blonde woman, however, must have been prepped for a funeral, because she had makeup on. Her face looked like she was still alive. The only telltale signs there was no longer any life in her due to the gray coloring of her body. There was another man in the room. Although he had his face and body covered up, he was lying with his back down on a stainless steel table, not too far from the blonde woman. He had a white sheet covering his body, but I could see his right hand kind of hanging limp off the side of the stainless steel table. His color was also gray. This must be what our bodies look like after the blood is drained. I was so scared, I couldn't move. I think I stayed stuck for a few hours, because when I finally mustered up enough strength to cry and run out of that room, the other kids playing hide and seek were no longer playing. Some of the kids had actually left the funeral already. I would later find out that I was in some kind of a trance and was actually in that room longer than I originally thought. I ran all around that funeral home looking for my mom before finally finding her outside looking for me. She told me that they were closing down for the evening. She and my father almost left me behind, because they couldn't find me. I was sobbing uncontrollably. Although I wanted to tell her about what just happened, I was afraid of getting in trouble, since I promised to be good if I got to tag along. That evening when I got home, I kept having visions of the deceased people I saw in that room. When I went to take a bath before bed, I saw the beautiful blonde woman sitting next to me on the toilet while I was in the bathtub. Scared, I submerged myself in the water and hoped she would disappear. Unfortunately for me, that was not the case. I squeezed my eyes shut as hard as I could and counted to 10 while underwater. Just as I was about to come up for air, I opened my eyes. There on top of me, peering down at me, was the blonde woman. She was no longer beautiful. She had a very evil look to her, and she pushed me even deeper into the tub. I recall I was fighting and struggling with her, trying to get up to the surface for air. When suddenly, it seemed like the tub got deeper. Beneath me, was the old man and the other man with the sheets drawn over him, trying to pull me down. The tub went from being normal to pool-sized in the blink of an eye. Although I fought hard, it wasn't enough to free myself from their clutches. Right when I could feel the life force draining from me. As if my soul was about to depart, the little boy's spirit I often played with at night, Tommy, appeared and pushed me back to the top of the bathtub. The 3 deceased people I encountered earlier vanished. I was gasping for air as I got to the surface, and jumped out of that tub as quickly as possible. I didn't even bother pulling the stopper for the drain, and ran out of the bathroom, soaking wet, leaving a trail of water behind me. My mom must have heard me leave the bathroom and went for her turn to bathe, when she noticed the water trail. She came to my room to yell at me for leaving behind such a mess. She noticed I was huddled in fetal position sitting upright on the bed crying. She asked me what was wrong. I told her about the game at the funeral home, and how I was in that room with the bodies. I then told her about the bathtub incident. She immediately went to get my shaman aunt, who was also our neighbor in the duplex at the time and lived downstairs. My aunt came upstairs and started spitting water everywhere. Over me, in my bedroom, in the bathroom, and in the kitchen. Everywhere except the attic where Tommy lived. She then tied a red and white string around my neck and said they wouldn't bother me anymore. My aunt said that when I went into the stainless steel room, I was disturbing them and they followed me home. She said they wanted to take me with them since I had seen them at their worst, at the mercy of the undertaker. They were upset that the undertaker had positioned them like so, and wanted to take their anger and embarrassment out on someone. I just happened to be that unlucky victim. If not for Tommy, I think I would have drowned in my own bathtub that night. Miraculously, he saved me. I'm not sure why he saved me, but I think it may have been because his older brother drowned in that very tub too. Tommy told me that their father killed both he and his brother. His brother drowned, while he was pushed out the attic window. Story 17, The Coffin and Tape. I heard this story about a year ago from my cousin. So as you know, Hmong funerals last about 3-4 days. This guy, let's call him Mua was recording the whole funeral with his camera. Hmong funerals are pretty scary to me. Anyways, after a long day at the funeral, everyone was starting to leave and so did Mua. When Mua got home, he undressed, showered, and was ready to get in bed. He noticed that he had forgotten his camera at the funeral home, so he called the funeral home. The first time he called, no one answered. The second time he called, no one answered. He called for a third time, and someone picked up the phone. Mua said, "I think I left my camera at the funeral home. Can I come get it?" The guy said it was fine for him to come. When he got to the funeral home, Mua found his camera still on his tripod, which was in the room where the body is at, but when he found his camera, he noticed that it was still recording. When he got home, he was rewinding it. Then he noticed something weird. He stopped at the part where the phone was ringing. Remember when he called the place? When the phone rang the 2 times he called, he saw no one. When the phone rang the 3rd time, he saw the dead body from the casket get up and answered the phone. When they hung up the phone, the dead body went back in the coffin and closed it. After seeing that, Muo was freaked out and deleted the whole thing. Yeah, sorry if this didn't make sense, but it is pretty freaky when I heard it. Story 18, The Crying Women. One evening just after the sun had sunk behind the horizon, my friend's uncle and his buddy were walking from the jungle and back into the village. On the way to the village they had to cross a bridge. My friend's uncle and his buddy went onto the bridge and began walking across it like every other day. But as soon as they got a bit closer, they could see a dark figure standing at the end of the bridge. Seeing as they had no other way to reach the village, they kept walking closer to the figure. As they got about halfway across, they realized the figure was a woman. She had her face buried inside of her hands and she was weeping. This concerned my friend's uncle and his buddy, because there were some robbers in the village. They were worried that maybe the woman got attacked. So they started walking faster towards the woman. When they finally reached her, the woman was still hiding her face in her hands and crying even louder. My friend's uncle and his buddy tried to console the woman and tell her to stop crying, but she wouldn't. They also took the woman's hands and tried to pull them away from her face, but she wouldn't let go. The woman was still weeping loudly. Her face buried in her hands, and then she suddenly tilted her head up, and removed her hands. All that was there was dead skin. She didn't have a face. Suddenly the woman started laughing from deep within her throat, an evil chilling laugh. My friend's uncle and his buddy were completely freaked out and they started running away. Right as they glanced behind them, the woman was running after them as well. Still faceless, still laughing. They picked up the pace and ran even faster, never looked behind them. Luckily they outran the woman and reached the village. As they finally stopped and turned around to look behind them, the woman was gone. Story 19. This happened pretty recently, but I don't remember all of them because I stopped thinking about it. I'll try to explain it the best I can, so don't judge my grammar or anything that doesn't make sense. This happened back in 2023 in the month of April. During those times was when I would go out late and come home in the middle of the night. I would have sleep paralysis. I don't know if it was because I come home late at night and bring a spirit with me. Or maybe there was another reason, but I'm not sure. My third older brother and I slept upstairs in the attic. He sleeps across from me. That night was around 11 p.m. My brother was already asleep, and I was about to sleep. By the time I knocked out, I started dreaming about me, my friends, and cousins. We were playing tag or a game. There would be a random person who was a little girl. At first I couldn't really see her face that well, but she seemed like a normal person. She would be the one chasing all of us. I don't completely remember what really happened, but all I remember was that I was the one that was getting chased most of the time. I would run the same direction as my friends and cousin, but I thought to myself that if I changed directions, maybe the little girl will chase the others. I separated myself from the others, thinking that I lost her. I got tired and rested at one spot, and realized she was behind me, across the street. This time it wasn't the little girl anymore. It was a different girl who looked deep in me with those two big eyes of her. I freaked out. After staring at her for a bit, 5-8 seconds, she started to run towards me. I got scared and ran as fast as I can. I was too scared to turn back and look at her. All I could think of was, just keep on running. After that I saw a fence in front of me. I didn't think of turning right or left, so I decided to climb on the fence and jump off. But what I didn't know was behind the fence, there was like an animal trap, a big hole that was digging and was stacking with sharp-tipped bamboo. Sorry for the bad at explaining. The hole was covered and I couldn't think of anything, and accidentally jumped in that hole and died. Before I died in my dreams, and before I slowly closed my eyes, I saw the lady who was chasing me looking down on me. Her face was rotten, bloody, and dark. Her eyes were wide open, staring deep down in my soul. I slowly closed my eyes while her face was on my sight and died. What was weird is that after I died in my dream, I woke up to reality. I didn't think too much about it and didn't care. I was just like, what a weird dream. Then I went back to sleep, and that's when the sleep paralysis began. I fell asleep really quick and start dreaming, but this time all I saw was my room, the dream by the way. I thought to myself, did I wake up again? So I looked around and started having that pressure into me. Like someone was on top of me, holding me down. My heart started beating fast, and I started breathing heavily. I yelled out for my brother. Not knowing if he was there or not, but he couldn't hear me. Even I couldn't hear myself. My mouth talked, but it was like someone covered my mouth. I tried to move my body, and I couldn't. While I was trying to escape, I suddenly heard a woman call my name. Let's just call my name Xog, not my real name BTW. A woman called my name 3 times. Xog. Xog, Xog. Then out of nowhere I heard someone with a really deep voice laughing. I was so freaked out and was like, WTH is that? I tried my best to break away to finally wake up. I woke up with my heart beating really fast. I was having a hard time breathing, and my back was sweating. It was around 12:30 a.m., and I went downstairs and told my mom about it. She just got home from work. She then lectured me about going out late at night, and what if I brought something or someone home. After that she made me sleep in the basement where my sister and little brother were. Hoping the spirit or ghost won't find me in there. I slept on my lil bro's bed. She put a little knife behind my pillow, but every time I try to fall asleep, I will feel that pressure again where someone is trying to sit on top of me. I couldn't sleep but stayed up the whole night. This sleep paralysis happened a week straight until my parents asked someone to do shaman to me. After that, I didn't have any sleep paralysis anymore until this year. The month of April again, 2024. This year I moved to sleep in the basement because my oldest brother and sister-in-law moved in with us. But this sleep paralysis is different from last year. I don't really go out late night anymore, but I had a feelings it's because the side area in the basement where I sleep that. Even today, I still slept on that spot. I built a room on this side of the basement. One side is covered with a plastic wall, and the rest I covered it with a curtain. I heard things about, don't sleep across a door. Behind the curtain, there's a door to the storage room, so I thought maybe it'll be fine. But let's talk about my sleep paralysis. This happened to me a week straight. Where the spirit or ghost came and talked to me as a mimic in my dream. It pretended to be someone that I know. Either my family or friends. I'm going to explain one of the dreams. In my dreams, which was late already, I walked downstairs to the basement and saw my cousin standing next to the bathroom. My bathroom is next to the staircase. I asked him, why are you here? He answered, oh, I just got off work and kuv tuaj nrog koj nyab ib plyag thiab nrog koj tam xwb. I told him okay, then come to my room. We went into my room. I was lying on my bed, and he was sitting on my chair. From what I remembered, we were talking for a bit of time. All of a sudden, I started feeling weird, like that pressure where you get sat on. I got sleep paralysis a lot of times and realized, oh, it happening again. I couldn't move myself, and I looked at my cousin who he started to touch me. I didn't understand why my vision was getting blurry, but while looking at him, he didn't look like my cousin anymore. Like he's transformed and changed to someone else. After trying to escape, I took one last look of him and realized it wasn't him. It was a random lady. Her hair was covering her whole face. Everything about her, including her appearance, was dark. After that I escaped myself and woke up from my dream. Back to reality, me wondering, they can become a mimic. But yeah, that was my experience with sleep paralysis. I'm not good at explaining, so I hope everything makes sense and understanding. Story 20. I just wanted to share this story because it's creepy and weird. Over the summer my family was planning to buy a new house because my brother got married. The place was getting crowded, so we wanted to move out of our duplex. My mom found a house online in Carlton, Minnesota close to Hillside Cemetery. Since my parents didn't work, they found a time to meet up with these people to check out the house. My dad and mom said the outside of the house was kind of rusty, but the backyard is super wide. They just didn't like how the trees were everywhere, because if there was a storm, the trees can fall onto the house. From what my mom said is, when I got in the house, it was very cold. My mom thought it was strange because it's summer, and outside was super hot. My mom took a look around the kitchen, and there was a lot of stains. My mom looked at the cabinets, and she said there were a lot of rusty jars and roaches. Basically, my mom hates pests. So from that she didn't even like the house anymore. What my dad told was, the guy, house tour person, and my dad went to look at the upstairs. The stairs were really steep and short. It kept feeling like you would fall from the steps. My dad looked at the rooms. The bedrooms were really small, otherwise, my dad didn't care. My dad said there wasn't a toilet in the bathroom. Only a huge tub. My mom was alone because the tour guy was with my dad. She saw this door in the kitchen, and it led to some stairs going downstairs. As soon as my mom got downstairs, she saw all these witchcraft stuff. She couldn't really describe it, but she knew that the house wasn't good. One thing my mom told me was that there were a lot of big chains. My mom didn't go all the way down. She stood at the middle of the stairs staring down. My mom went to my dad and said they should leave. It was getting late. When they were leaving, the tour guy asked my parents if they were interested. My mom said straight out no. He said it's alright. Not a lot of people are ever interested. As they were leaving, the tour guide told my parents that there once was a suicide downstairs, and someone hanged at the backyard. My mom was totally ready to leave. When they came home my mom told my dad, and my dad said that he was getting a sense like they shouldn't be there. Story 21. Have you ever wondered if these stories are just a coincidence? Like my story above, in 2022, I had just found out I was pregnant. I was probably 8 weeks. Well, according to the resident above, only the girl was left next to me. I was pregnant with a boy and gave birth to a healthy baby boy. This year in early May I found out I was pregnant. According to my records I was already 8 weeks, but the baby was only measuring 6 weeks with a low heart rate. 1 week after my first appointment I had a miscarriage. I wanted to know the cause and most of all, the gender. When test results came back, baby was a girl. We had been hoping for another baby girl. Our hearts broke. It has been 90+ days, and I'm just coming back to think about this. Was she never meant to be born? Was I never meant to hold her? Or is she still waiting for me to bring her into this world? Story 22, Tudge es and Tudge os. My twin sister passed away when we were still in high school. She was my best friend and then cancer took her. I don't wish that on anyone. It's so slow and painful but, at the same time, fast and relentless. Slow when you're waiting for a miracle, and fast when the last of days come. I'm 26 now and, fatefully, I have twins of my own. It's a blessing but they constantly remind me of my sister and I. They're only toddlers, but they are so similar to us. One day Kua, the older of the twins, called to me using a pet name that my sister used to call me. I didn't think anything of it at first and thought that maybe she had heard my husband say it. At dinner, she said it again. Yes, more juice, please. My husband and I started laughing hysterically. He then asked me if I taught her how to say that. I told him that I didn't. He said that maybe she had learned it from YouTube videos. I looked over to my other daughter and I felt the hairs on my neck rise. She was just eating and looking at me, almost in a daze. After a moment, she came to her senses, smiled at me, and then started imitating her sister. They two of them went into full annoying toddler mode. After we tucked the girls in, I brought up what we spoke about at dinner. Babe, I think Kua was calling Mintaj es the way my sister used to call Mintaj es. Remember? She would call me that and I called Herntaj os. He laughed and said there's no way that was what she meant. Although he tried his best to assure me that I was overthinking this, I still felt very uneasy about it. That night, I was woken by noises in the house. Frightened, I nudged the grizzly bear I call my husband until he got up too. I think someone is in the house, I whispered. Did you check? He responded. I pushed him until he got out of bed. He started walking towards the bedroom door and I quickly followed. We first went to check on the girls. Kua was in bed but Song wasn't. I felt a little relieved because it must have been Song making all the ruckus. The rear patio doors was open so we rushed over. Outside on the deck Song was sitting on the steps and eating an Oreo. We could hear her talking softly, but couldn't make out what she was saying from where we were standing. I walked over to her and put my arms around her. She turned to look at me and I asked her what she was doing. Talking to Antintaj os, she said. Every hair on my body stood up. Baby, who's Antintaj os? I asked her. She pointed to our fire pit area and said, she was over there, mommy. Antintas os said come outside but Kua won't wake up. I picked her up and hurried back into the house. We put her back to bed and tried our best to do so ourselves. The next morning, we woke up to the girls chasing each other around the house. This would have been normal except for the fact that they were calling each other Ntaj es and Ntaj os. After the previous night and now this, I was really scared so I called my Uncle Wright and asked him to come over. After meeting with Uncle Cha, he said that he needed to free the girls from my sister's spirit. She had been searching for me for a long time but couldn't find me. When she passed away, we threw a dummy of me into the ocean. I don't really understand all the customs, but I believe this was done to protect me. It wasn't until I had my twins that my sister was able to find me. He said that their auras are very similar to my sister's and mine, and that's how my sister was able to find us. She means no harm, but my uncle said that the longer she refuses to leave, the harder it will be for her to cross over to her next life. Potentially, she can become an angry spirit and hurt us. Per his instruction, we had a sending ceremony for my sister. Since then, we haven't noticed anything strange, but the girls still call each other Ntaj es and Ntaj os. They both said that Antintaj os had taught them this, but they also said that Antintaj os hasn't visited for a long time, so even though it irks me a little, I'm okay with it. Story 23, The Golden Gate in the Sky. So back in year 2000, before my grandma passed away, I remember visiting her at the hospital with her last hours. She told me, when I die, look up into the sky at night and you'll see me going to heaven. Don't quite remember because I was only 7 years old. 3 days after the funeral, we were at my uncle's house where she was last residing at. I don't know, for some weird reason, all of us young kids were out in the middle of the night running around in the streets having a blast. Until we saw a big huge light shaped like a gate, castle gate, in the sky. That was not all. We also saw what looks like a light slowly going up to it. As it gets closer to the gate, we can clearly tell that it was our grandma that was going up there. We were all shocked and ran into the house to tell our parents about this. As they all went out to look, the light was already gone and it just looked like a regular clear night sky. Although I'm not Christian, I believe that heaven is a real place, because I saw it and now I believe it. Story 24, Wristbands. I found this story off a website. It's not that scary, I guess, but yeah, lol. In Korea, when a patient is taken to hospital, a white wristband is placed on their left arm. These wristbands contain the patient's name and information. When a patient dies, a red wristband is placed on their right arm, and he or she are taken to the morgue. In one particular hospital in Korea, a young doctor was working the night shift. It was around 2 a.m. when he finished his last operation. He was on the 5th floor and pressed the button for the elevator. The doctor was tired after a long day and was looking forward to the end of his shift. At 2 a.m., the hospital was very quiet. Most of the patients were asleep, and many of the nurses had already gone home. He entered the elevator, and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. The elevator stopped at the basement, and the door opened. They saw an old man dressed in a white gown standing there. The old man was about to get in when the doctor suddenly slammed the close button and punched the button for the 5th floor. "Why did you do that?" asked the astonished woman. "I've performed a lot of operations," replied the doctor. "I've seen a lot of people die. When a patient dies, they get a red wristband placed on their arm." The woman was silent. "You saw it, didn't you?" said the doctor. That old man had a red wristband on his arm. "A red wristband," said the woman as she raised her right arm. "You mean like this one?" Story 25. I just wanted to tell a story I heard from my brother, who heard it from my uncle in 2006 maybe. I don't really remember. He told me a story about his friend from Laos 20-something years ago. He told me that he was around 15 or 16 years old around that time. For now, let's just call my uncle's friend Kong, because I don't know his real name. Kong was bored one day. He asked my uncle to go with him to the other village past a mountain, which you had to go through the jungle first. Kong just wanted to see if there were some girls that he would like. "Do you want to come with me to the village on the other side of the mountain to meet some girls?" The village had many graves in the jungle, so my uncle was afraid enough to maybe sht in his pants, but Kong and my uncle were very close buddies, so my uncle didn't want him to go alone. Kong and my uncle left the village and entered the jungle. The elders warned kids not to go near the cemetery because the spirits did not like to be disturbed. The spirits would either take a liking to you and follow you, or appear to scare you away. My uncle's dad knew the village shaman very well, so the shaman would visit my uncle's family often. The shaman would always remind my uncle and his younger brothers to never go into the jungle alone. Also, if they ever heard anyone call them in the wild in broad daylight, don't ever respond back unless you see someone. My uncle knew the jungle pretty well because he hunted with the village men before. He also knew that Kong and him were getting close to the cemetery. "Kong, we better start going around now. I don't want to go near the cemetery." Kong was arrogant and really didn't care much about the graves. My uncle realized that the sun was going to set by the time they managed to get around the cemetery because it was already around 4 p.m. or so. Seeing the graves, my uncle took a deep sigh. They started sprinting across the cemetery. Unlike American cemeteries, the graves weren't organized and the entire area was filled with graves. They tried their best not to step on the graves. If they did, well, they were screwed. While running, Kong swore he saw a young girl around 7 years old maybe. Not even 10 seconds later, he saw an elderly man. My uncle then swore he saw a man and a woman holding hands in dead burial clothes. After 10 minutes of dashing across the graves, they finally passed through the cemetery. After telling each other of what they saw, they were pretty shook. It was around 5 p.m., and they were closing in on the mountain. The mountain was more wide than it was tall, so it would have taken at least an hour to walk around it. Going over the mountain would take even longer because of the terrain maybe. My uncle might have been a little traumatized by what he saw. My uncle heard a masculine voice calling his name. Tang. Tang. He asked Kong if he heard that. Kong told him that he didn't hear anything, but my uncle's face was serious. They started to speed walk this time. Coming to a crossroad, they looked at all of the ways. This time they could not tell which way the mountain was because of the canopy. Kong decided to climb a tree and see where the mountain was. He saw the mountain and told my uncle to walk on the left road. They started to go at a good pace again. The deep masculine voice called my uncle's name again. This time it was louder. Tang. 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 My uncle was close to passing out on the road. He told Kong about the voice again. Kong said that maybe they should run. The faster they got to the village, the more the spirits would fall behind. Not that it was gonna help. They got to the village around 6 p.m. The sun was close to setting now. My uncle's nose started bleeding. Then he fainted. The next day he woke up in a shaman's home. Kong was outside speaking with the shaman. The shaman told my uncle and Kong that a demon had linked itself to my uncle's soul. The shaman then escorted my uncle and Kong back to their village. The village shaman had to Neeb Sabe. See what was going on. The shaman said that the demon wanted more souls, and my uncle had a strong soul. The demon needed it. The demon was also bloodlust. It would not let go no matter what offer was made. The shaman and my uncle's dad made a doll and did some hoodoo on it. They threw it in a river. Story 26, The Carrier. We have one son, 9 years old, and he was the baby out of the 7 children. My husband and I are very protective of him. He always wanted a pet, rather it be a goldfish, a bird, or dog, but our excuse had always been we have no time for pets. One evening while filling the bird feeder in our yard, a brown pigeon with a red string on its leg flew by. We were surprised at how tame it was. My son was able to hand feed the pigeon. It would follow him everywhere he went. I told him several times to not touch it as it may be a lost or sick bird. He just kept begging to let him keep it as a pet. The pigeon would follow him everywhere like a puppy. The pigeon was not afraid of anyone. After several no's, my husband and I finally gave in. We told him under no circumstances can the pigeon go inside the house. My husband duct taped a cardboard box to put the pigeon in. Later on that night, a voice woke me up from my sleep. I listened carefully as the whole house was super quiet. I heard my son saying, "Please leave me alone, please," while sobbing. I was thinking it was just him dreaming. I went into his bedroom. His night light lit up the room dimly. I see my son under his pillows and blankets kicking and moving around. He kept saying, "Leave me alone. Leave me alone." I rushed to his bed and tried to pull the cover off. Him holding tight would not let loose. I screamed my son's name a couple of times and he finally let go. I pulled the cover off of him to see the pigeon fly out. I screamed and jumped up as it spooked me. My son crying uncontrollably as the pigeon flew around his bedroom crashing from wall to wall like a loose wild animal. My son's face was in horror as he just kept crying non-stop. I held on to him in my arms trying to hush him as the pigeon still crashing all around us. My son kept crying, "I'm scared, it hurts," over and over. I just held him tight as my husband rushed into the room. My husband paused by the doorway with his jaws dropped. Him pointing behind me. My husband yelled, "What's that? Who's that?" I looked over my shoulder to see a little Asian boy dressed in black. His face was blue and purple. He had long nappy black hair. Him staring at me while I held my son in my arms. He was no more than 3 feet away, hiding behind my son's dresser. I just cringed in fear as I held on to my son. I closed my eyes tight, hugging him. My husband quickly turned on the lights to the room. As quickly as the lights came on, my husband yelled, "Where did it go?" I was too afraid to look behind me as I just cried, holding on to my son. The pigeon still flying from wall to wall, crashing to everything. My husband checked everywhere in the room and could not find the little boy that we saw. We were both scared and confused. All the while my son kept saying, "It hurts." I looked into my son's eyes and said, "Everything will be okay." While I was still shaken from what I saw, my son lifted his shirt and said, "Mommy, it hurts." As my husband and I looked, there were scratch marks all over his chest and back. Near his shoulder was a bite mark. My husband and I could see teeth marks imprinted on his shoulder. Now we were even more scared. We were unsure of what we had seen, and now our little baby had marks. All of our daughters woke up from the commotion. They were all standing in the hallway, scared and crying. My husband and I didn't know what to do besides gather everyone and leave the house. We closed my son's bedroom door with the pigeon still in it. We went to my in-laws' home that evening. We told them what happened. The following day my mother-in-law and a great-uncle who's a shaman went over to our home. After they did what they had to do, the great-uncle told us the pigeon inside our home was a carrier for the ghost. It was considered black magic. Whoever did this had came upon the spirit and used the pigeon to send the spirit away. For unknown reasons the pigeon picked our place. Uncle then told us to never ever pick any wild animal or items up if we don't know who it belongs to, as it may be a black magic trick of some sort to get rid of something horrible. Story 27. I just wanted to share a true story that had happened to my mom long ago. Back in 1986 my parents lived in Fresno, Cali. My mom and dad lived with my grandma and grandpa. From my mom's side, they were just newlyweds. I believe that my mom was 6 months pregnant with my older sister in her belly. One day my dad went night fishing with his friends and left my mom home with my grandma. My grandma was watching TV in the dark alone with the lights off. My mom was in her room sleeping. Then all of a sudden, she heard her door opened up. She saw a black figure that looked just like my dad just standing by the door. So my mom said, "Oh, you're home," but there was no reply. So my mom stuck out her hand and tried to reach out to him. Then suddenly, the black figure bit my mom's finger and disappeared. My mom was so scared that she couldn't even scream. She turned on the lights and saw nothing there, but saliva all over her finger with teeth marks. My mom rushed to my grandma and asked her if my dad was home yet, but my grandma said that it's 3 in the morning, and he still isn't home. My mom got so scared she slept in the living room, until my dad came home later that day and told everything that happened to her that night. So my dad didn't go anywhere at night for weeks, and everything was back to normal. Months later, my parents decided to get their own place. They moved to an old apartment. In the beginning everything was fine until my dad had to work night shifts in order to get better pay. That first night that my dad went to work, things started happening again. My mom heard doors opening and closing, black figures running around the house, and just really weird noises of things being dropped. She told my dad and he decided to take a night off work. That night, my dad dressed in his work clothes and went out the door. My dad sneaked into the back door so even my mom won't know that he was home. My mom often leaves the TV on at night and has it on mute. My dad waited until 3 a.m. and was holding his shotgun. When he heard my mom screaming, he ran into the bedroom and saw that my mom was on the floor crying. Standing in front of her was a black figure of a man. My dad shot the figure with his shotgun 3 times before it disappeared. My dad turned on the lights and saw that there were no bullet holes on the walls, nor any damages to anything. So that night they left to sleep at my grandma's house. Next day they did a shaman thing. The shaman had said that it was my mom's old boyfriend from long ago. The shaman said they had made a promise to each other that they will love each other. Even after death, they will come get each other. He had just recently died in Laos and came to get my mom. They then did the whole shaman thing to get my mom fixed. Everything was okay for a month until one day my mom left the window open when she was sleeping. Suddenly, my mom saw black smoke come from the window. Then appeared the back figure again. This time, he spoke to my mom and said, "You tried to force me out, but this time I will take you with me." My mom was so scared that she ran all the way to my grandma's house. My dad went to my grandma's house when he got off work. They once again asked the shaman guy what to do. The shaman guy said that there is nothing that they can do, but for my parents to believe in God to hope that God will save them. My parents turned into Christians and never again did that black figure appear again. Story 28, The Old Funeral Home at Florin Perkins and Morrison Creek, Sacramento, California. My sister, Lisa, is a Marine and stationed in NC. She left Sacramento ever since 2011. In the summer of 2017, she took vacation and came back to visit Sacramento. One day she went out to San Fran with some cousins over the weekend. She got back to the house on Sunday late afternoon. The sun was almost setting. No one was home. She messaged our group message to see where my siblings and I were at. My older sister told Lisa, "We all went to an uncle's funeral." My older sister told Lisa that she should come because there were lots of relatives here that wanted to see her. Lisa then asked which funeral home, and my older sister said the one on Florin Perkins by the Army base. Filler, those of you that live in Sacramento, my older sister meant the funeral home, Moon Sun Memorial Services in the Army Depot. Yet, everyone in Sacramento doesn't call it Moon Sun. Everyone would just say the one by or at the Army base. Lisa got ready and left to the funeral home. As I said before, Lisa hadn't been back ever since 2011. The funeral home Lisa was actually going to was an old and closed one on Morrison Creek and Florin Perkins. This funeral home has the exact details as the Moon Sun, on Florin Perkins and by the Army base too, therefore, Lisa assumed it was the one that my older sister had said. My older sister didn't know that Lisa didn't know the one on Morrison has closed. As Lisa turned onto Morrison Creek, there were no cars parking outside the funeral home on the big street at all, as there should be since there is a funeral and usually there are a lot of cars. The funeral on Morrison is just a warehouse rented by Hmong people to held funeral. It is gated, and inside has a parking lot or you can park outside on the big street of Morrison. See the pictures to see what I mean. My sister then drove into the gates assuming maybe there might be some cars inside the parking lot, but it was empty also. At this moment, my sister was having a frightening feeling. She thought she was hallucinating. She thought that it had got to be this one but wondered why no one was there because this one was their one on Florin Perkins. She U-turned out of the parking lot, but before she was going to exit the gates onto the big street, she looked in her review mirror. She then saw a man in a green shirt, khaki vest and khaki pants like he was going fishing walking across the parking lot. She was scared, but since the man did nothing, she assumed it was a hobo. My sister drove to a Chevron nearby and called my older sister. She told everything to my older sister. Then my older sister gave her a more exact location of where the Sun Moon Funeral Home was. As Lisa got to the right funeral home at the Army base, she then felt more relieved. As she entered the entrance of the funeral home, she examined the pictures of the deceased uncle. This uncle wasn't really a close uncle of ours, so Lisa didn't know much about him. As Lisa looked at one of the photos, the uncle appeared to be wearing the exact same clothes as the man Lisa saw earlier at the closed/old funeral home on Morrison Creek. At this moment she was really shook. She stayed for a bit and met everyone, then left home early because she was scared. The next day she told everything to my dad. My dad did a small ritual calling her spirit and tied a string onto her wrist. After the funeral had passed, and they buried my uncle, my dad had a dream of my uncle coming to say sorry, and that he did not meant to harm or scared Lisa. Lisa just happened to be on his way traveling to where he needed to be. Wrong place. Wrong time. This brings me to my next story. I don't know if the old GS ever told y'all never to sleep outside in the car late at night during a funeral because of superstitious activity, but yes, this is what happened to one of my uncles at the old funeral on Morrison Creek. The funeral home on Morrison Creek is set on a big plot of land. You can see all the way out to the train tracks. Behind the funeral home is a dead and groveled land where people also parked too. My uncle had a Tundra parked out there during a funeral one weekend. It was late at night, and my uncle was staying overnight, so he decided to take a nap in his car. My uncle slept on the driver's side. He was at the stage where he was entering his sleep but not fully asleep yet. He then heard small steps of gravel around his truck. He assumed it was just little kids running and playing, so he didn't care much. As he tried to sleep again, there was a tap on the window of the side he was sleeping. He got up, and there was no one. He thought to himself, okay. If it was a person would be standing outside as if he or she were trying to get your attention, but the fact that there was no one standing there, he assumed it might be something not human. He quickly got out and decided to just stay in the funeral home with the rest of the relatives. Please don't go to that old warehouse on Morrison and Florin Perkins. I think it may be haunted due to its previous use as a Hmong funeral home. Story 29, Hmong Ghost Tales. Back in Thailand, there was a town containing about 10-15 families, and all the families had a lot of children. All the kids knew each other and shared a close bond. They would play every day from sunrise to sunset while their parents farmed. Late one evening, the group of children were playing outside and they heard the village dogs started barking at the forest. The forest was not far from their village and homes were. All of the kids were frightened and went home. As for the dogs, they barked throughout the night. The next day the kids came out to play again, as if nothing happened the night before. They played until evening came again. The dogs started to bark hysterically again. Some of the kids needed to go home early evening for supper, but the other kids decided that they wanted to play longer, so that group of kids, ranging from the ages of 6-12, planned to meet outside the village to play hide and seek. After supper, the dogs simmered down from barking. All the kids met up at the spot as planned. They played up until it was pretty close to midnight. Then they decided to play one last game of hide and seek before heading on home. When they were about to begin, the dogs started to bark again. All of the kids were really scared at this point, so they partnered up with a partner. But one of boys were so excited, he grabbed a random partner and took off hiding. After everyone was found except the young boy, they went searching for him but couldn't find him. They thought he probably went home since he always cheat and go home first. The next morning, the boy's parent went looking for him. They asked all of the kids but no one saw him ever since last night. One of the girls said that when they started the hide and seek game, she saw him climbing on a girl's back and remembered seeing her back had fuzzy hair. 4 months later, the parents couldn't find him and he hasn't returned home. They decided to see a shaman. The shaman said that when they were playing, the boy accidentally grabbed a ghost to be his partner, but he didn't know. The ghost told him to climb on her back so she can take him to a good hiding spot. The boy was never found. Story 30. After months of searching, my fiancé and I purchased our first home. I wanted something that was updated and move-in ready, while he wanted something he could tear apart and restore, and luckily, we found one that fit right in the middle. Our first home project was expanding our kitchen. With these older New England houses had a lot of rooms and walls. We decided to tear down the dining room and create a larger, open floor with an eat-in kitchen. During our renovations, my fiancé got a promotion at work. We were ecstatic, but this also meant that he would have to travel a lot more often. At first, everything was okay. Friends and family would visit sometimes when the fiancé was out of town, but one night, my sister-in-law said she felt really uneasy in the guest room. She said that she felt like someone was watching her at night and swore she saw the hallway light turn on and off often. At first, she thought it was me, but I assured her that I hadn't gone into the hallway at all. I told my fiancé about this, and he brushed it off. He said I must have been getting up to use the restroom and just forgot. For peace of mind, I agreed. A few weeks later, while he was on another business trip, I was doing some work in the garden and noticed the hallway light flicker. I thought it may have been a friend who came over and was looking for me since the door was unlocked. They probably didn't know I was outside. I went in and called out to see if anyone was inside. When I didn't get an answer, I checked the street to see if there were any cars out that I recognized. When I didn't see any, I grew worried and called my fiancé right away. He said it may be a bad switch or something since we were doing renovations. I was still uneasy but agreed. That night, I fell asleep in the living room while watching television. I was woken up by a loud thud from the upstairs bathroom. I went to check and found the shampoo and conditioner bottles on the shower floor. I thought to myself, maybe I put them too close to the edge, and they just slipped off. This didn't make me feel much better though. I went downstairs to turn off the TV and decided to go back upstairs to my bedroom to sleep. While I was changing into pajamas, I heard the TV turn on with the volume all the way up. The sudden noise scared the life out of me, but, eventually, I gathered the courage to go unplug the TV. While I was hurrying down the hallway, the bedroom door slammed shut. In a panic, I ran. I had my eyes on the front door. I needed to get out of the house immediately. The door lock seemed to have a mind of its own. Getting the door open felt like it took forever. I could still hear the television screaming at me, flashes of light reflecting off the walls as it played. When I finally got outside, I crossed the street and looked back at my house. No lights were on. No noise. I stood there in shock, trying to decide if I should go back inside to grab my phone and the car keys. I took a few steps toward the house but stopped when I saw the hallway light turn on. I stared in horror at the window. There, looking back at me, was a woman with what looked like a child in her arms. Story 31, The Fourth Child. This story takes place in the hills of Thailand around the 80s. There was a family with their only child named Feng, who was at the time 10 years old. One day, his parents brought him along to work in the fields. While his parents were tending their vegetables, Feng decided to take a break and play with the other Hmong boys he saw. Feng went to ask Phum if he wanted to play with him. Phum and Feng were from the same village and around the same age. Because he was familiar with him, Phum decided to join him. "Do you want to play hide and seek?" asked Feng. "Okay, but we need more people," Phum replied. "Let's ask them if they want to play," Phum suggested, pointing his finger towards two boys sitting inside a resting hut. The two boys were Tub, who was 8 years old, and Shua, who was 11 years old. Tub and Shua both were from different villages and weren't familiar with the fields, but were happy to make acquaintances with Feng and Phum. Because Feng wanted to be nice, he decided to be the seeker while the other boys hid. With his hands covering eyes and facing towards a tree, he began counting to 10. The other boys ran as fast as they could, and taunted him saying, "You can't find me." Once he finished counting, Feng started looking for the boys. The first boy he found was Chua, who was hiding behind some tall grass. Disappointed being the first one found, Shua helped Fang look for the others. Shua was looking through the fields when he saw a small path leading up to a tall tree. As he walked on the path, he saw a shadow come up from behind the tree and go back down again, like if someone stood up and crouched back down on their knees. As he approached the tree, the wind started to pick up and the leaves began to shake, followed by some giggling. Just as he was about to turn and see who was behind it, Fang shouted, "Where are you going?" "I found the other boys." Confused, Shua turned around and saw Fum and Tub standing next to Fang. As Shua continued to look behind the tree, he saw that there was no one there. "Never mind," Shua said. And he went back with the boys to count for the next round. After several rounds, it was Fum who was now the seeker. As he looked for the boys, Fum decided to check around the fields in front of the resting hut until he heard the floor of the hut begin to creak. As he turned around, he thought he saw someone crawling underneath it. As he bent down on his hands and knees to check if any boys were underneath the hut, he saw someone's feet quickly dart out and run away. As he ran the same direction, he was able to find Fang and Shua hiding behind some brush. "How did you find us?" Fang asked. "I saw one of you running away, so I followed you," Fum replied. "But we were both here the whole time." Shua responded, "Maybe you were chasing Tub." "I didn't find Tub yet," Fum said. "Let's go find him together." Just as the boys started searching for Tub, Fum and Fang's parents started shouting from a distance, "We're done for the day, we have to go home." They said, "You guys can go home, I can find Tub," Shua suggested. Fang and Fum looked at each other, but didn't think much of it. "Okay," Fang replied, "we can play again next time." As the boys started going back home, it was now the afternoon and the sky was turning orange. That night as Fang was sleeping in his bed, when he awoke to the sound of footsteps walking on the side of the house. As he listened, the footsteps stopped by the outside of his wall and then followed by some scratching. "Who is it?" Fang asked. There was no answer. Thinking it may have been a small rodent or animal, Fang went back to sleep. Moments later, he awoke to the same noise again. This time, Fang was convinced that there was something there. "Who is there?" Fang asked. This time, there was someone giggling on the other side. As Fang searched for his flashlight, the person whispered, "Come find me." Confused, Fang asked, "Fum, is that you?" "It's too late and dark out, we will play tomorrow." After a short pause, the giggling started again and Fang began getting scared as it sounded like a small child. Thinking it was someone trying to tease him, Fang took his flashlight with him and went outside. As he shined his flashlight, he didn't see anyone. "Whoever is out here, go home. This isn't funny," Fang said as he was irritated. After going back inside, Fang fell back to sleep for a short while until he heard the peculiar sound of coins jingling. As he covered his head with his blanket, he felt water beginning to drip through the blanket and soak his head. There was a slight squeak that came from above. Bothered by this, he awoke once again. Pulling the blankets from over his head, he tilted his head to the side so the liquid wouldn't drip into his eyes. He concentrated on the ceiling, adjusting his vision to find the main source of the leak. His eyes widened from shock along with his now parted mouth. He could feel the blood rush away from his face as he laid there staring. The squeaking came from the piece of rope which was tied to the beam of his room. The rope was attached around a shadowed figure, which took shape similar to a small child. The body swung from side to side, slowly twirling around. His feet pointed straight down and his head leaned slightly to the side with an overstretched neck. Its shoulders were limp, but tense along with his hands. It looked stiff. Figuring it was probably just a dream, and his mind was just playing tricks on him, Fang mustered up whatever courage he could gather and grabbed his flashlight to shine it at the figure. To his surprise, it was still there, and the figure was dressed in monk clothes with a vest made of coins. Shining the flashlight at the back of the figure's head, he realized that it was a figure of a boy. Paralyzed in fear, he had no choice but to watch the boy with his stretched neck turn around, revealing his dark purple face from having too much blood, his dark swollen tongue as it stuck out his swollen lips, his bulging white eyes popping out of his sockets, and the stale yellow pus that leaked from the tear drains of the eyes, dripping down his cheek and onto Feng's pillow, where his forehead would lie. "Let's go play," whispered the hanging figure. Scared for his life, Feng ran to his parents' bedroom and told them about the hanging figure. His parents checked his room thoroughly, but there was no one in there, and the bed wasn't damp from whatever Feng had described to them. However, being shaman and worried for his son, his father performed a ritual that night, hoping to get rid of whatever was tormenting Feng. The day after his experience, Feng went to visit Fum and told him about what he saw. To his surprise, Fum too had a frightening experience where a little boy with a broken neck was chasing him in his dream. He too had to undergo a ritual to cast out whatever was scaring him. Curious, the two boys went to find Shua in the next nearby village. After finding Shua, they discovered that something was very wrong. That day that they went to play hide and seek, Shua was never able to find Tub and instead went home. "I searched for a long time, but I couldn't find him," Shua said. "It was getting dark and my mom wanted to go home, so we left. Except, when we started going home, we noticed that we could hear footsteps following us from behind, but there was no one there." Shua added. "When we got home, my mom blessed our house in case if something tried to get inside." The boys looked at each other in shock, but no one knew where Tub had disappeared to. They went around talking to the villagers in Tub's village, asking if they have seen the small boy. But to their surprise, no one had seen him. As they approached an elderly woman sewing by her doorstep, they asked her about the little boy. She told them that there was only one child she ever heard of that was formally named Tub. She told them, a long time ago, there was a man and a woman who had a child named Tub Mua. The couple had been married for almost 10 years until she found out that he was having an affair. The day she found out, she wore her wedding dress and dressed her son in his finest clothes and took him to a field and hung him in a tree. She then went to a nearby river and drowned herself. Very scared, the boys realized that the child that they had been playing with had been the little boy who was killed long ago. Just as they were going to leave, the elderly woman shouted at them. "Hey, what is wrong with your friend? He is always looking sideways. Was he born like that?" Story 32. My sister and I always talked about how scary it felt to be the last one to fall asleep when going camping. One summer back in 2014, my family and I went camping. There wasn't really a nice hiking trail, so my sister and I decided we just walked down this long road. I remember coming across this cabin which felt really weird. I stared at it for a while until I heard my sister call out to me to hurry up. Later, when it was started to get dark, we all put campfires and sat around it making s'mores and playing cards. There were a total of 5 families of us all together. When it was getting dark, everyone was getting in their tents, and there were only few of us still playing cards outside. My auntie, my other aunties, and we stayed up pretty late playing cards. When we decided to go to sleep, everyone else was sleeping already. I crawl into my tent where my husband and my daughter were already deep asleep. Just when I made myself comfortable next to my husband and barely closed my eyes, I heard a woman with a crying, moaning voice. It sounded like it came from right outside my tent. I was so scared, but I didn't think much of it. I just tried to brush it off and go back to sleep. After a few minutes, the crying came back. Only this time, it sounded like it was far away. It went on like that for 4 minutes or so. I got up to look, and there it was. A long-haired girl, I say maybe 5 feet tall, wearing a dirty, white gown, walking slowly around my mother-in-law's tent. My heart felt like it stopped. I was so scared I cuddled my husband and went under the blanket. The crying got louder. I knew it was outside my tent, but I ignored it. She would walk around my tent, and her crying was about 4 to 5 seconds apart. I heard her walking around my tent like this for maybe 20 minutes before she started walking away. That was the longest 20 minutes of my life. She was crying and walking away. It was scary. I had no idea whose tent she went to walk around next, but as long as she was away from my tent, I didn't care. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up that whole night, and the next day when everyone got up, we cooked, ate breakfast, packed and got ready to go home. I was glad that was the last day because I didn't want to stay another night. On the drive home, I told my husband everything, and my brother-in-law told me that when he went walking that day, he saw her by the cabin, also at the same cabin I saw when I was walking. Story 33. This is a cousin's experience called Grandma. Sitting next to my grandma who was peacefully asleep in her bed. I remember the last several nights, she had been hallucinating. She could not sleep for several evenings. She kept telling the family that she was afraid of death. My grandma had her bedroom lights on every night for the past week. She kept saying there's people who's waiting for her. I remembered my grandma being very paranoid. She had her flashlight with her everywhere she went in the house. One prior evening while watching her dozing off and on in the middle of the night, she just jumped up on her bed scaring the shit out of me. For some odd reason, her cozy warm room just became cold. My grandma pointed at the footboard of the bed being terrified, said, there he is, help me, he's coming for me." Me being scared, I yelled, "Grandma, where?" I frantically looking everywhere with the blankets half covering my face. My grandma just kept pointing at the footboard where her eyes focused. My arms filled with goosebumps and all my hair raised up. I looked everywhere and still did not see a darn thing. I had to be brave. I told my grandma that she was just dreaming. My grandma yelled, "He's on the bed, he's coming," while she kicked violently under the blanket as if she was kicking at somebody or something. I was so scared I covered my face, shaking to myself. And then it hit me, I had to help my grandma overcome this fear. I slowly peeked behind the blankets and did not see anything. I got up from the rocking chair and hugged onto my grandma. I said, "Don't be scared, Grandma, I'm here. I won't let them take you away." My grandma crying in my arms like a little child who was in need of their mother. I held on to my petite grandma feeling helplessly. She hiding her face in my arms sobbing away. After a few minutes, my grandma looked up at me. Her face full of fear, eyes filled with tears, and breathless, she said, "Do you believe me? Or am I just a crazy grandma to you?" I didn't know how to answer. I didn't want her to be disappointed. I just told her everything will be fine. Later on that day I asked my grandma what she had seen. She said for the last few nights there's been a white guy. He is tall, wearing a black suit. He has short gray hair, a long face, with a scarf wrapped around his mouth. Half of his face under his scarf is torn off. He called himself Francis. At first he only appeared in the dark or hid in the shadows watching her. But for the last few days he didn't care anymore and would come out during all hours of light. My grandma said he claims to be the guide to help her go to the next life. My grandma explained every time before he appeared and afterwards, she would smell a strong odor of sweet flowery scent. She is afraid and was not ready to go. I was just surprised at what my grandma had just told me. Me think to myself, Francis. How the hell did she come up with a name like Francis? She could barely speak English. I just shrugged it off thinking it may have been a name she got from watching television. But back to that evening, as I watched her sleeping like a baby for the first time in weeks. My heart was put at ease. I remembered thinking to myself, hopefully Grandma is back to normal now and we could get some sleep in. As I slowly rock myself in this rocking chair, I feel asleep. It felt like I had just closed my eyes when someone touched me. I woke up to see my grandma walking around in the room. I was surprised that I didn't hear her get up from the bed. I'm thinking she's probably loosing it again. I asked, "Grandma, what are you doing?" My grandma just ignored me and walked into her closet. Darn, I better get up and see what's grandma doing. As I walked up to the closet, my grandma came out. In her arms she had a black garbage bag with strings tied around. My grandma came up to me and said, "This is for you, it was made by mother and now it's yours." As my grandma handed me the package, a knock came from the door. I looked towards the door and my grandma said, "Come in, I'm ready." I asked grandma, "Ready for what?" I looked at the door and see a Caucasian man in black suit at the doorway. He had gray hair with a scarf partially covering his mouth. My heart started to pound hard. I didn't believe what I was seeing. I tried to talk but I was too scared to say a word. I just froze as I stared at this man, the man my grandma had been telling me all about. My grandma turned towards me and said, "That is Francis, I'm not afraid anymore. Your dad is here with him." Seconds later, I heard another voice coming behind Francis. It sounded like my dad. He said, "Mom, are you ready?" As he came towards the doorway. I looked at the doorway and I couldn't believe my eyes. Tears just started to flow down my cheeks. "Dad, is it really you?" He just waved and smiled at me. Him wearing a traditional Hmong outfit while holding on to a rope. He said, "Yes, it's me. It's been a while, my girl." I got up and walked towards Francis and my dad. As I got close to the doorway, my grandma held onto my arm. My grandma said, "It's not your time, child." My dad looking at me also said, "I'm sorry but you can't come with us. Your grandma will be all right." My grandma hugged me and said, "Take care of your siblings. I will be okay." I just kept crying, unknown if this is a dream or if it was real. I just missed my dad so much. I just wanted one hug. My dad said, "Mom, hurry. Dad is at the garden waiting for us. I brought Dad's ox so you can ride him back." I just watched in tears as my grandma walked out the room. I saw Francis close the door behind. I sat back on the rocking chair and just cried to myself. I felt a touch to my shoulder. I looked up to see my mom. My mom said, "Wake up, what's wrong?" I look up to be relieved that it was a dream. I turned to see my grandma still sleeping in her bed next to me. My mom then said, "Why does grandma's room smell so flowery?" I was just in shock, I couldn't answer my mom. My mom went to my grandma. She said, "Grandma, are you okay?" I watched my mom as she started crying. My mom called out for my stepdad to come in the room. My mom turned towards me and said, "Grandma had left us." My mom hugging onto my grandma. I was in disbelief. As I got up, a black bag with strings tied around it dropped to the ground from my lap. I didn't know what to say or believe. I just cried quietly to myself, knowing that my grandma is with my dad and grandpa in a better place. Story 34. Once in a while I get these weird scary dreams. Not sure what it means, but here's one that freaked me out. I translate it to English because I don't know how to spell in Hmong. So whatever quotes you see me use, try and say it in Hmong, lol. After having my daughter in December 2020, I spent the week at my fiancé's house. It was just my daughter and I while he went to work. The day was normal, we ate and slept. Not much you can do right after having a baby. My fiancé came home and we did our usual routine. Cook and clean, you know, the boring stuff. Well, that night I decided to have my newborn baby sleep in her crib, which was only 2 feet from where I'm sleeping. Don't worry, nothing happened to my baby. So in my dream I was at work. I work for a day program for adults with disabilities. After work I would usually drop my clients off, and sometimes I'm the last one back. I dropped off the keys off inside and went home. Well, in my dream I dropped off some clients, came back to my site, and was like, these MF parked in all the spots closest to the door. So it meant I had to park way down the parking lot. As I parked and started walking up to the door of my building, I also noticed how dark it was. The only things I saw was a row of vans to my right, and a row of van to my left. The only light I saw was a random light pole in front of this huge tree. It was a few feet away from the front door, and a picnic table next to it. Which it was strange because in real life, my job looked nothing like that. As I got closer to the door and past the big tree, in the corner of my eyes I saw two shadows that had just morphed into two black cats. In my head I said, FML, I'm just going to pretend I didn't see them. As I got closer to the door I heard in Mung, she already saw us, we might as well show her and go mess with her. As soon as I heard that, I turned around and said F. I ran to the picnic table. I was not about to punch in codes for the door, because they would have gotten me. It was two Hmong girls in the funeral Hmong clothes. One was about 15 and the other was maybe 8-10 years old. They were laughing and giggling like it was a damn game. They chased me all around the picnic table. As I was running for my damn life I said, F this. I'm taking them down with me. I said in Hmong, if you come closer, my mom will kill you too. Go back to where you came from. Have no shame. Spit spit spit. My mom said it works, and again, these MF laughed and said you can't do anything to us. At this point I was screaming and yelling at them. So I was like, okay, next best thing. In the name of Jesus I send you two back to where you came from. Yup, just like in the movies. I'm not even a church person, I just watched a lot of movies. I'm yelling and cussing them out. Both of the girls started to grab their shirts in pain and begged me to stop. Then they started laughing at me. They literally started laughing and giggling at me and said, we're just kidding. It's not doing anything to us. I had my damn hopes up. I gave up they were going to get me, so I jumped across the picnic table so fast and sprinted towards them. I grabbed the older girl by the hair and kicked the little one. I was messing these two up. They're crying and screaming, and I am not stopping. I woke up, and I was so pissed. I grabbed my baby because, ain't no ghost is going to come back and mess with me and my baby. Moral of the story is sometimes when it all fails you just gotta dog walk these ghosts. Story 35. When I was younger my father shared a story with me about his encounter in Laos before the war started. He was about 7 years old at the time. My grandfather, my father, and his younger brother, who was only 4, went to the farm to harvest rice before the new year. The farm was across a small creek from a dark bamboo forest that always made my father feel uneasy. He had the constant sensation of being watched from the other side of the creek. Whenever my father looked across the creek, my grandfather would scold him to stay focused on the work, but my father's sense of unease persisted. As the sun began to set, my grandfather decided to stay at the farm for one more night. He instructed my father to start a fire for the night, but my father, scared, cried and begged his grandfather to leave. Despite his fear, my grandfather insisted on staying just one more night. As night fell, the usual sounds of birds and wind ceased, plunging the area into an eerie silence. My grandfather, who was a shaman, felt a chill down his spine, sensing that something was watching them. My younger uncle began to cry in fear, clinging tightly to my father. Though my grandfather didn't want to frighten the children, he knew something was wrong. He quietly prayed and lit incense to the ancestors and land spirits, asking for protection. Later that night, my father woke up to find frogs jumping on their feet. He saw my grandfather looking alarmed and frightened. My grandfather told my father to pack quickly and not to speak. He then woke up my uncle and carried him on his back. Without flashlights, they hurriedly packed and left the garden in the dark. My grandfather told them to walk as quickly as possible without looking back and to stay silent. As they left, my father heard a strange pig-like cry coming from the bamboo forest, which seemed to be getting closer. The unsettling sound made them walk even faster. By sunrise, they reached the village, exhausted. My father asked his grandfather what had happened. His grandfather explained that from the start, he had sensed a creature watching them from across the creek, but chose not to alarm the children. As night fell, he had chanted prayers for protection, unaware that the frogs jumping on my father's feet were actually a way for the creature to count how many people were present. My grandfather had also received a warning in a dream from the land's protector to flee, as the ancestors could not hold the creature back. The next day, my grandfather and some great-uncles returned to the farm with a few village dogs. The dogs reacted fearfully, barking at the creek. They had discovered human footprints leading from the creek to the hut and back. Black fur was found around the hut. Concerned about the unknown creature, my great-uncles decided it was best to avoid the garden from then on. Story 36, Marry or Blonde. When I was younger, like 8-9 years old, I liked playing by myself a lot because I was the baby girl. My mom and sisters would tell me to not play by myself, and they'll sometimes call me stupid. One day my sisters and I got into a fight, so my mom separated us to separate rooms. Since I was already used to playing by myself, I played by myself with my naked doll. My siblings called her Chucky. Sad, I know, but her name was Mary. As I was combing Mary's hair, I talked to her as if she was a real friend. I can't remember what I said, but I'm sure I was venting at the doll about my older sisters. My second eldest sister came into the room I was in and she screamed loudly. I startled and threw my doll on the floor and ran out the room crying to my mom. A couple years later, when I was 16, my sisters and I were looking at some old kids' photos of us for my parents' appreciation party. There was a picture of my doll Mary and I. My second eldest sister made a comment saying she remembered my doll. And all my sisters made a joke that they used to throw my doll in the heater because she looked like Chucky. It was pretty hilarious thinking back. On the day of my parents' appreciation party, my sisters and I were getting ready for the party, doing our hair, makeup and whatnot. My sisters were helping each other out while I did my own hair and makeup. Growing up, I've always been independent. I like doing things on my own. My second eldest sister, we were a lot closer, commented something like, "When we were younger you used to play by yourself, and now we're big you still like to do things on your own." I'm just like, whatever. Then she said, "Remember that one time when we got into a fight and mom separated us?" Me, which one? Sister, the one time I screamed. Me, yes, why'd you scream? You were so mean. Sister, what the? Why did you scream then? Me, because you screamed and scared me off. Sister, so you didn't see what I saw? Me, no, what did you see? Sister, never mind then, I thought you saw it. Me, no. What did you see? Sister, nothing. We argued for a long time about what she saw. She didn't want to tell me because she thought I'd be too scared, so I just stopped and dropped the conversation. A few months later, my second eldest sister got married. On the day of her wedding, the Hmong way, dealing with the marriage cost, we were both in my bedroom talking about everything. I finally asked her, "One thing I want to know before she leaves is what did she saw that day we had that fight as little girls?" She said if she tell me now I'll be too scared. I told her I'm pretty sure it wasn't that scary. So she finally told me she saw a little girl, blonde hair, hair tied back into a ponytail, dressed in 18's navy blue dress. She said the little girl was on my back playing with the doll/Mary too. I thought she was joking. Me, shut up, whatever. Sister, seriously, I thought you saw her too. Me, no, I thought you were just being mean. Sister, nope. Mom said I can't tell you but. So this is the story my sister told me, going back to age 8-9, that day when my sister and I got into a fight and she scared me off. She said when she got to my mom in the kitchen and I came in crying my face didn't look like mine. She said I looked like someone else. My mom just kept yelling at us. She told us to go time out so we did. When my sister and I got to the wall, she said I kept banging my head on the wall and I kept laughing. My sister got really scared so she kept moving towards the kitchen. As she moved, I would bang my head harder. She said I banged my head until I KO. My sister said that was not the first time that happened. She said every time when my sisters and I got into a fight I would get possessed, very angry, and abusive to myself, and I would scream or laugh loudly. And when that happens to me my mom would separate us. And every time when my mom separated us, she would not let me out of the room until I was happy and back to normal. But that one day when she saw me, she said that was the first time she ever saw me like that. She said I wasn't just playing with the doll, I was poking the doll with a pen and the little girl behind me was possessing me. Ever since that day, my mom took both my sister and I to therapy because my sister would not go to sleep at all for nights. When she told me I got really scared because that moment when I thought about my childhood, I couldn't remember most of them beside myself playing by myself and taking lots of medicine. When I was younger I had to take about 7 in the morning and 5 at night. The only reason I ate them was because my mom told me if I was good and eat them she'll buy me something. I took medication at age 6 until I was 16, 10 years. When I turned 17 my parents became Christians, and I grew to wonder who God was, and my youth pastor told me he could take away everything that I did not want and that he is my healer. On July 18, 2008, I gave my life to God and I was delivered. I no longer took medications or see therapy after I got delivered. But now, I now see the other side of the world, spirits, demons and angels. Story 37. February 22, 1993 at 2:01 p.m. I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. I had morning sickness the entire pregnancy. I gained only 11 pounds which put me in the high-risk category. Needless to say, her birth didn't go as planned. I was induced into labor at 36 weeks because she had stopped growing. Thankfully after 4 hours of labor I delivered a surprisingly healthy baby. 3 hours after delivery I started hemorrhaging severely. My blood pressure dropped dangerously low. My husband and I were told if the bleeding didn't stop within the next few hours, I would have to have surgery. My nurse, Wendy, began giving me shots of Pitocin every 30 minutes. After 2 shots nothing had changed. I couldn't focus, everything was surreal. I guess because of my low blood pressure. I remember thinking I was going to die but I was very calm. Wendy came in to let me know her shift would be over soon but someone else would come in to give me shots. Wendy was the attending delivery nurse for 3 of my children. She promised to come check in on me the next morning. It was 6 o'clock in the evening when she came to my room. Her name tag read Maria. I don't remember seeing a last name on her tag. She was a short lady, about 5 feet. She had short brown hair with gray streaks and beautiful blue eyes. She had a soft comforting voice unlike anything I've ever heard before or since. I rolled over to my side thinking she was there to give me my next shot. Even though moments before I could not lift my arms, because I was so weak. She said, "Oh honey, I'm not giving you a shot, you don't need another one. You're going to be just fine." She stood next to my bed smiling and rubbing my legs for a few minutes. I looked towards my husband, intending on asking him if he heard what she had said. He was laying in a chair sound to sleep. I looked at the clock, it read 6:05. She smiled at me, patted my leg, turned towards the door, then she was gone. I didn't see her walk out the door, she just sort of vanished. I thought I might have fallen to sleep before she left the room and then woke up shortly afterwards, but I looked at the clock. It read 6:06. I again looked over at my husband in hopes he would acknowledge she had really been in the room, but he was still sleeping. I tried to wake him by calling his name. He didn't hear me. I picked up a thermometer from the bedside table and threw it at him. It landed on his chest. He didn't wake up. At that moment a nurse, Sheila, walked into the room carrying the familiar needle with her. I told her I didn't need any more Pitocin. That's what the last nurse had told me. She said she was my only nurse for the night. She questioned me about the other nurse. What did she look like? Did I know her name? She looked over at the empty bassinet at the foot of my bed. She asked if my baby was in the nursery, to which I replied yes. I saw the relief wash over her face. She told me she would be back in a minute and quickly rushed out the door. A short time later I saw her standing at my door along with 2 other nurses. They were whispering and looking in at me. Finally they all walked into the room and came over to my bed. One nurse looked to be in her mid-20s, I cannot for the life of me remember her name. The other was surely in her 50s. Her name was Sarah. They started to fire questions at me so rapidly it frightened me. All I could think was the lady was probably trying to kidnap my little girl. The noise of me demanding to see our baby woke my husband up. To this day he swears he doesn't remember falling to sleep. He says he remembers sitting down in the chair, wondering why the room was suddenly freezing. The next thing he remembers, there were nurses in the room. I was demanding very loudly to see our baby and he was holding a thermometer. They assured me my baby was in the nursery. Nurse Sarah told the younger nurse to bring E to me. As we waited, Nurse Sarah took my blood pressure. She turned to Nurse Sheila and told her to put away the syringe and call my doctor. I wouldn't be needing that shot. She then pulled a chair next to my bed and sat down. The young nurse walked in carrying my baby. She placed her in my arms and walked out of the room. Nurse Sarah pulled up a chair and sat down next to my bed. She sat there smiling as I looked E over. She asked if E was my first baby. When I replied fourth, she asked about my older children. Just as I was sure she was about to tell me something important, my doctor came in. When my doctor came in, he started in with his own questions, but mostly they were directed at Nurse Sarah. When Nurse Sarah explained it to him, he smiled and said, "Okay then." He checked me over, told me he was simply amazed at my recovery. He said even the color had come back into my face. He stood there staring at me for a minute or so, then suddenly he asked if I was hungry, to which I replied starving. He told me he would order a pizza on his way out. After he left, Nurse Sarah said, "I've never talked to anyone who Maria has visited." She looked closely at my face as if she was trying to decide whether she should keep talking or not. I silently stared back at her because I knew. I don't know how or why I knew, but I knew. Her story was that Maria had been a nurse on the maternity floor years ago. Nurse Sarah said, "The story I've heard is that Maria got called into work one stormy night. She never made it here. The rumors are that she sometimes visits the new moms. All the descriptions of her are the same." Nurse Sarah silently looked down at the floor. I remember thinking she was saying a prayer. Then she shook her head and said, "Who am I to question these things?" I wanted to question her to find out more, but I could tell she had said all she was going to. She rose from the chair, patted my leg, winked and said, "They say she only visits special people." The next day, to everyone's surprise, I was released from the hospital in excellent health. As my husband and I walked down the corridor with our baby daughter, we could feel everyone's eyes on us. Some were whispering, others were just staring. Perhaps they were thinking I was a lunatic, or maybe they were wondering, why her? This story is a special part of me. I know that night I experienced something most people never do. For that I am extremely grateful. Growing up, my daughters loved this story. Especially E. When other kids would say things such as, "I weighed 10 lbs at birth," E would proudly say, "I almost killed my mom." Story 38, things aren't always what they seem to be. We used to live in these old apartments in Frogtown, STP, MN. It was in this very ghetto area, and there were many Hmong people who live in these apartment complexes. We were poor, so we stayed in one bedroom. There were 5 kids and my parents. After moving in, I met many relatives of ours who also lived in the apartment complex. These relatives of ours would tell us that the apartments are haunted and there are always ghosts/spirits wandering around at night. Of course, the ghost stories scared me. I was probably 7-8 at the time. All us kids all slept on a king bed, it was set high, and my parents just slept on a mattress on the floor. One night as we were all sleeping, I woke up to a noise, rubbed my eyes and saw these big shadows moving down below where my parents slept. They were moving so slow and I could hear them breathing. I couldn't really make out what the shadowy, dark blob was because it was really dark, so I got scared and slept with the covers over my head the whole night. The next morning I asked my siblings if they heard anything last night. They said no. The next night I was waiting for it, but I didn't see it. Then a couple of weeks later, I was awoken again by the same noise and saw the big blob, shadowy and dark figure that I saw last time. I couldn't make out to what it was and was too scared to go to it, so I just watched this shadow for a bit and fell asleep. The next morning I asked my parents about it. They told me it was nothing, and that I was dreaming. This would happen every now and then. At first I thought that maybe some ghosts/spirits had come and sat on my parents, and because my parents didn't want to scare me, they told me to ignore it. After about a couple of years or so later, my brother was born and I didn't see the scary shadows anymore. When I was a bit older, I realized that those scary shadows that I used to see at night were just my parents. I would see the scary big and dark blob and couldn't make out what it was because my parents had the blanket covering them. LMAO. Story 39, never stay in the same motel room twice. This is not really a scary story, my friend would say otherwise since he experienced it, but I just wanted to share. Growing up, I've always been told to never move back into the same house once you move out, but I never thought it pertained to motel rooms too. My friend and I would meet up at different motels when we go out. We've met up at many motels, but never checked into the same room twice. One night, we got there pretty late, so most of the rooms were taken. We were offered the same room we stayed at previously. Neither one of us thought anything about it. It's a motel room, a room for us to rest our head for the night only. We slept that night, nothing happened. The next morning, I left early for work. My friend stayed behind. Fast forward to the next time we met again. That night, he kept fighting something in his sleep. Finally, after a few times, I got up to wake him up and asked him if he had a bad dream. That's when he told me about what happened the morning after I left when we stayed at that last motel room. He said, "After you left, I went back to sleep. I was about to fall asleep when I felt someone else in the room with me. The room felt really cold. It felt like a dream, but not a dream. I saw this shadow come at me. I fought and fought this shadow. I don't know how long I fought this shadow for, all I know is that when I finally woke up when my alarm went off at 10 a.m., I was even more exhausted than before. I've been fighting this shadow ever since." I asked him why he never told me about it. He said because he didn't think I'd believe him. I was like, "Are you kidding me? I'm Hmong. I believe in that stuff. You could have told me, I would have found a way to help you sooner. Old people believe in these stuff for a reason. We call them superstitions, old people call them lived experience. If you can avoid it, never stay in the same motel room twice or you'll encounter what my friend did too." Thanks for reading. Story 40, Staying Out of the Dark. This past year, I started interviewing people at my workplace. We hired a lady and started her training with us. The first day of training was us getting to know each other better. She told me a story of her past. For privacy, her name will be Alice. When Alice was younger, she used to get bullied a lot. There was this mean kid who would call her names and pick on her every day. One day when Alice was waiting for her parents to pick her up from school, she saw her bully also waiting for his mom to pick him up too. She was so fed up with him she yelled out loud, "I hope your mom dies in a car accident." Moments later, a car accident occurred right near the school. All the students who were waiting for their parents also rushed to see who it was. It was the bully's mother lying dead in the car. However, when Alice approached the car, she noticed something. The mother's eyes were looking straight at her. Alice freaked out and left the area. Ever since that incident, Alice told me she had been scared to death by the dark and sees the mother in the dark. She gets slept on every night if she sleeps with the lights off. She carries a flashlight with her when it's night because she senses the mother is near trying to get her. Alice even covered her whole car interior with LED lights to prevent the mother from getting her in the car when driving during the night. Due to this, Alice is so stressed. She takes pills to keep her sanity normal and to fall asleep. She told me, "Every time I look into the dark, I could just see those eyes I saw when the car accident happened." She's always there in the dark. And she is very angry at me. When Alice told me all of this, I couldn't even train her anymore because I was scared. LOL. I recommended her to see a shaman, but she told me she doesn't believe in shaman stuff, so I don't know how to help her. Story 41, Housewarming. My wife, and I went to a housewarming last weekend that has left us in shock ever since. Our good friends, Lang and Sarah, bought a house roughly 2 months back. It needed minor cosmetic work but had great bones. Lang's a carpenter, and Sarah has a subscription to HGTV magazine, so they were definitely ready to take on this project. When my wife and I got there, most of our other friends were already on site. We greeted everyone and then found Lang and Sarah in their kitchen making drinks. Sarah immediately took my wife out to the backyard to see the tool shed she had converted to her own private reading/drinking/hot Cheetos eating area, so Lang gave me the tour of the rest of the house. When we got to the rooms upstairs, his friendly, happy tone changed. "Chris, bro, weird stuff's been going on," he whispered. Lang isn't one to play jokes or make up stories, so I was curious. I asked him to go into more detail. "I haven't told anyone else, but I think there's something wrong with the house, like, spiritually. I spoke to Sarah about it, but she insists that everything is fine and that I'm just being paranoid." Well, I think something is wrong with Sarah too. I've caught her talking to herself a few times now, and she refuses to use the bathroom on the first floor. It's crazy. She won't admit it, but if you pay attention, she will only use the bathroom on the second floor. I haven't seen anything, but I just have a really bad feeling all the time. Admittedly, I grew a little uneasy as he spoke to me about his worries, but I decided that the best thing to do was to calm him down and try to assure him that everything was going to be okay. We regrouped with everyone else and continued on normally. Towards the end of the night, Lang and Sarah insisted that my wife and I stay over, so that they could take us to an awesome breakfast spot in the morning. I really didn't want to, but after some convincing, also known as tequila shots, we gave in. We slept in a guest room on the first floor. During the middle of the night, I got up to use the restroom. While opening the floodgates, idiotically, I thought about what Lang had told me earlier about Sarah never using the first floor bathroom, and honestly, it freaked me out. I flushed quickly, turned around, and was about to briskly walk back to bed when I bumped into Sarah in the hallway right outside the bathroom. Before I could say anything, she wrapped her arms around my waist, tucked her head into my chest and wouldn't let go. "Sarah! What the heck?" I yelled. New came running out of the guest room and saw Sarah tightly hugging me. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I don't know, but she won't let go," I told her. That's when we heard footsteps running down the stairs. The lights came on, and we saw Lang and Sarah standing over the foot of the stairs. "What's wrong? You guys okay?" exclaimed Lang. New and I looked at each other in horror. How did Sarah get over to Lang so quickly and, on top of that, make it by New without us knowing? I didn't even realize that she had let go of me. We sat down in the living room and told our friends what we had just experienced. They assured us that they were both upstairs in their room the whole time. We continued to talk, and eventually, we all returned to bed. Of course, New and I stayed up until sunrise after that. We talked about it a little more during breakfast, but none of us were able to make sense of what happened. Coincidentally, my in-laws came to visit New and me later on that day. When my father-in-law saw me, he asked me if I had been feeling ill. I told him that I was fine, but he insisted something was wrong. He's a shaman, but he understands that my wife and I don't practice the old religion anymore. Still, he decided to look into what he was sensing. "Son, your spirit is not with you. Where have you been the past few days? If you don't find your spirit soon, you'll get very sick," he told me. New and I told her parents what had happened the night before. Worried, they accompanied us back to Lang and Sarah's house. My father-in-law did his spiritual stuff and then told me that Sarah wasn't letting my spirit come back to me. It didn't make sense to any of us, especially Lang and Sarah. That's when my father-in-law asked to speak to me outside in private. "Son, we need to call your pastor and see if they can help. Sarah is there in flesh and blood, but Sarah's spirit is not. Sarah's spirit is holding on to yours because she is scared. Something else is in her body. We need to call your pastor and see if they can help." With that said, I called my pastor and told him the situation. He and other elders of our church met us at Lang and Sarah's. My pastor was able to confirm what my father-in-law had said. For the next few hours, my in-laws, New, and I sat out in the backyard waiting while our pastor and his team tried to exorcise whatever was in Sarah. Eventually, they came out and said that she was going to be okay. My father-in-law looked and said that he'd call both of our spirits back and then continued to do so. We left Lang and Sarah's, and for the past few days, everything, according to Lang, has been okay. He said she doesn't act strange anymore, but he's still a bit uneasy. We offered our support if they needed it. Needless to say, this was an experience that we'd likely never forget and definitely don't want to relive. Story 42. One September morning at roughly 5:00 a.m., I awoke suddenly with an uncomfortable feeling. Across the room, on the other bed, I see the silhouette of my sister sound asleep. As I laid on my bed, I looked up at the window and see that the sun is barely out yet. The room was dark. That uncomfortable feeling lingered, but I brushed it off and closed my eyes, trying to go back to sleep. It must have been no more than a few minutes after closing my eyes, I suddenly felt this strange presence. I couldn't move. This feeling was way too familiar. I knew what it was. I was experiencing what common folks call sleep paralysis. I tried to wiggle my toes, but no success. I tried to wiggle my fingers, another failure. With every strength in my body, I forced my eyes open. At the foot of my sister's bed, sat a woman in white with long dark-colored hair. She was looking away and then she saw me looking at her. She turned her face towards me, grinned and moved towards my direction. The way she moved towards me was a visual I'll never forget. Her body was hunched over, her hands curled up to her chest. And her grin. It was as if she was amused I saw her. I quickly closed my eyes and when I reopened them, she was gone. My face was facing towards the window instead of my sister's bed. My heart was still racing and I was scared as hell, but I called out to my sister. I needed human comfort. Luckily, she woke up and the first thing I said was, "Turn on the lights." She jumped up and ran to the light switch. There was nothing in the room. Outside, the birds were chirping away and the sun was peeking out behind the trees. I told her what happened. She believed me. She always has since my first encounter years ago. We sat in bed in silence until the sun was fully out. Story 43, Poj Sug. Ever since I was a kid I wondered about the Hmong Poj Sug. As Hmong kids, we all heard the spooky stories from the adults. Some probably even used threats of the Poj Sug to scare us as kids into not wandering away during a fishing or camping trip. As a young man, I wondered if maybe this creature was just some kind of new, yet undiscovered monkey. The typical description of the Poj Sug is that it is small with long white hair, sometimes long black hair. It looks human and has fierce teeth and sometimes claws. To me, that sounds like an animal. But now as an adult, I cannot discount that this creature reeks more of the demonic than the natural. One time while chatting with my mom, we started talking about the supernatural. She usually does not open up about it because I think my mom is able to see things from time to time and it scares her. On this occasion, my mom told us that when she was a young girl, her cousin was taken by a Poj Sug. She said an uncle was going out to gather firewood. He didn't want to enter the jungle alone, so he took his little niece with him. She was only about 5 or 6 at the time. They didn't go far into the jungle, but they were off of the main trail. He began cutting wood as the little girl played nearby. After some time, he realized she wasn't humming to herself anymore. He looked around and panicked. He looked up and in the tree was a white creature with long flowing white hair jumping away on the branches. At that moment, he heard faint voices. He ran towards the trail and saw a small group of Hmong people walking along the trail. He begged them for help. They spread out and looked for the little girl but found nothing. He ran back to my mom's village and the adults went out to search. Nothing. They had someone say and that shaman said the little girl was taken by that white Poj Sug. Another time, I was traveling with my dad and 2 other men to Washington, D.C. My dad and those 2 men had been soldiers during the war and they were all going to D.C. to take part in one of the gatherings they used to stage to garner support for the Lao Veterans Naturalization Act. It was great to be able to go and just listen to them recount war stories. We drove all through the night to arrive in D.C. the following morning. Late in the night, the war stories waned and the subject turned to ghost stories. They all had scary stories to share but this is the one that I remember about a Poj Sug. I asked the men if they thought there was anything to the Poj Sug stories. They all said yes. Then I said ask them if any of them had ever seen a Poj Sug. Cha got really serious and he said he had. His name is not really Cha but for this story that's what we'll call him. Cha said that when he was a boy, he was playing hide and seek with his cousins. None of them were older than 10 or 11, so they played near a house which was right by the entry to the jungle. The kids were laughing and running around just doing what kids do. Then an old man that lived in the house came out and told them to keep it down. Cha said there was a calm, one of those big woven baskets worn like a backpack to carry firewood and other stuff in, leaning against the side of the house with a piece of cloth covering the top. The old man laughed and told the kids to keep it down as he leaned over to pick up the calm. Suddenly, as he removed the cloth, a little white monkey-like thing jumped out. It had long white hair and red eyes. It bit the old man's hand then it screamed as it jumped away into the jungle. The kids stood in shock for a minute then they all ran away including Cha. Cha said he went and told his dad. Cha's dad and several other men came running to the old man's house. They found him. He was okay, but he had a bloody bite mark on his hand. Cha said the old man got really sick and nearly died but they did some kind of shaman blessings on him to save him. Story 44, SHHSHH. After this incident, I never slept with my lights off. I come from a small family, so we live in a town home that had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. I had the biggest room, which was next to the bathroom, and my brother's room was across the hall facing the bathroom, and if you turn left, there was my parents' room. This incident happened in December 2017. I remember I would sleep with my lights off and put on sad music. One night I was listening to music laying down and crying. Then suddenly there was a loud ring in my ear. Every time there was a ring in my ear, I'd encounter something paranormal. About 15 seconds later, there was a whisper SHHSHH. I sleep alone. I wasn't sure and thought I was just hearing things, so I paused my music and took out my earbuds. In a man's voice, the whisper went, SHHSHH. I laid there in the dark on my bed not knowing what to do, and there it was again. This time, it sounded as if he was right next to me whispering into my ear. I laid in the dark trying to calm myself down. I had goosebumps all over my body and refused to walk through my room in pitch black just to turn on the light. Not knowing what to do, I called my mom. She asked me why I wasn't sleeping and why I was calling her so late at night. I told her I heard some whispers, and she told me to sleep in my brother's room, but I refused to do anything because I was scared, so she told my dad to come get me and walk with me to my brother's room. After that night, I refused to sleep with my lights off. I will need some type of lights in my room to be able to sleep. Story 45, The Empty Village. All of the stories that I have written on here are true. This story is about my father's experience when he was back in Laos. It took place several years after the Vietnam War had ended and where the Hmong people had to reseed into the jungles. During the night, the Hmong men would go into nearby villages that had been evacuated or raided to see what was left, whether if it were food, supplies, or survivors. On one particular night, my father and his older brother had decided to go explore a village that they heard was abandoned. Back in those days, my father said that people would hang meat on the walls of their homes to dry, and that was what he and his brother were hoping to find. That night, it was very dark and difficult for them to see. All they had was a single gas lantern, and the moonlight to guide them. The only weapons they had brought with them were their Hmong knives and crossbows strapped on their backs. On the walk there, they were surrounded by darkness and the silhouettes of the trees. All they could hear were their footsteps and could hardly see their hands in front of their faces. As they followed the lonesome, grainy trail into the village, they came across some empty homes. Everyone in that village had fled, taking whatever they could in a hurry. With nothing they could take in the first few homes, they soon came across a medium-sized shanty home that had a roof made of straw and had woven wall panels. My father, with the lantern in his hand, followed along the walls and throughout the home using his hand to guide him. His brother asked him, "Can you feel anything?" My father replied, "No, I don't think there's anything here and it's hard to see." But after a few moments of feeling around, my father felt something hanging along the walls. He said to his brother, "Hey, I think I found something. But it's kind of big. I think it's a horse. It has long hair. It smells and it's kind of stiff." Because of the dim lantern, my father couldn't make out what he was looking at until he held it closer to the subject he was touching. After seeing what he had in his hand, my father immediately freaked out and stumbled his way out of the home. As he panicked, he tripped on the step of the doorway and fell on his back, breaking his crossbow. His brother ran after him not knowing why he was so frightened. After catching up with him, he yelled at my father, "Why did you run? You have the light." I couldn't see. Out of breath, my father said, "It was a face. It's girl hanging on the wall." I thought she was a horse because of her long hair, and then I realized I was touching her face. His older brother, not convinced in what he saw, decided that they should go back and confirm if it was true. Though my father was scared, he was convinced in what he saw and was determined to prove his brother wrong. They both went back into the home and shined the lantern on the body hanging on the wall. Sure enough, it was the body of a young girl. My father described her as a teenager, between the age of 15-17, and she was pregnant. Her body was already changing colors, and she was stiff with her toes pointing downward. She was in a tattered mung dress, but even though her body was decaying, he could tell that she used to be a pretty girl. By looking at her, they weren't sure how she died. Their fear eventually turned to sadness. And after that, they went back into the jungle without finding any food. Why did they hang her body? I asked. My father replied, back in those days, the shamans would hang dead bodies on their walls. Whoever hung her probably left her like that because they didn't have time to bury her when they fled. Story 46, My Father-in-Law. When I got married, my husband, the only living child, and I were still young and somewhat immature. As soon as we married, I grew up quicker than him and started working full-time. Meanwhile, he continued to hang out with the boys every night and drink. When I gave birth to our 2 kids Ryan and Abby, he would always leave them home to go drink. My father-in-law was the only one who ever helped me because my mother-in-law passed away before we married. My father-in-law was such a good person. He loved me like his own daughter and fed my kids by his hands. He was older and did not speak much English. He would always scold and yell at my husband. He would threaten him that he was encouraging me to leave him because I deserved so much more than what he was to me and the kids. When I worked 2 full-time jobs to support our bills and household, my father-in-law would have my lunch packed and always watch his grandchildren. He dropped them off at the bus stop, and every day he picked them back up. He didn't know much English, but he would even still try to help the kids with their homework. He called Ryan, Relon, and Abby, and this is how he called them. If it were not for him, I would have left my husband a long time ago, but because my father-in-law loved me so much I stayed with my husband because I was scared no one would love my father-in-law. My kids were his world also. 5 years ago, my father-in-law became sick with stomach cancer, and during those last years, Ryan, Abby, and myself all took care of him. We would hold his frail little body up to go to the bathroom every time, and we would spoon-feed him porridge, the only thing he could eat. We continued on for 1 year performing total care of him when he declined. I continued to work my 2 jobs but cut down hours in order to pay the bills and for his health bills. My kids were 11 and 7 now, and they would take care of him while I was working, but I was also expecting my 3rd child. My useless husband was still absent and useless as expected. When my father-in-law passed away, the children and I went into a great depression. We had lost our stronghold, our father, our source of strength. He has been resting in paradise for 14 months now. A month after his passing, I gave birth to my 3rd baby, Angelina. I started experiencing some abnormal things around the house during that time also. Angelina had a nursery, and I would hear her cry during the night, but it would sound like someone was soothing her. I never paid any mind to it because my daughter looked fine on the baby monitor when I would check. During some mornings, I would find empty bottles that were fed to her during the night. I would also find dirty diapers that were put into the pail. I never did these things for Angelina during those times I found them, and the children also denied going in. We all knew it wasn't my husband either because he was always passed out at his friend's house or on the couch. Ryan told me that he can still feel his grandpa tuck him, pull the blanket to cover him, in some nights, and Abby said that she can feel her grandpa patting her little head when she is sad thinking about him. As for me, there were some days when I was just so exhausted from work that I come home to find food already made and put away in the refrigerator. My kids would say that they didn't cook it or prepare it, and no one came over that day either. I can't help but to feel sad and heartbroken. I feel that my father-in-law is still lingering on for the kids and me. His presence is wanted around us, but I know that he also needs to be set free. Could it be that he wanted to come meet his new baby granddaughter first? Is he just helping me through this tough time? We had the 1-year celebration to release his spirit, and everything went well. Is he staying by our side by choice? Should I tell him to go? I don't want to have to say goodbye to him forever. Story 47, Night Shift at the Hospital. I used to work as a cleaner at a community hospital during the night shift. My job was mainly to sweep and clean the basement and the medical surgical floors of the hospital at night. At first, I did not think much about my job. Usually, after 9 o'clock at night, the main entrance of the hospital locks, quiet hours start, lights are dimmed on the floors, and visitors seem to vanish. I always begin my shift cleaning the basement level first, then make my way up to the medical surgical floors later. One night, after I finished sweeping the basement level, I felt very unusual, like as if I wasn't alone. Even though there wasn't a human being in sight, I had a feeling like there was a presence right there with me. I didn't think much of it and just shrugged the feeling off. I hauled my cleaning cart with me as I carefully made my way over to where the elevators were located. As I approached, I felt a light chilly breeze brace my arm as I saw a lady in a hospital gown walk right past me, her face pale and frightened. She quickly passed me and disappeared out of sight, like as if she didn't even notice me. I thought to myself, Sam no es liege twg, seem you of losensig tej chahov no thiab. Puas yog nws uam kevani. NWS yog nij los yog dab na. Why is it that there is a patient on this floor at this time? Could she be lost? Could it be a patient, or is it a ghost? I turned back to the elevators and realized that all 3 elevators were not even opened. The hairs on my head, neck, back, arms, and legs were standing perpendicular as I realized that a ghost had just passed me by. Well, how else could the patient come out of an unopened elevator? Ghost. Yog dab xwb. My heart was racing and my body felt weak. I walked as fast as I could over to the elevator and pressed the button to call the elevator down. I wanted to get off the basement level immediately. I waited impatiently, as I listened for the elevator to descend from the floors above. As the elevator approached the basement level, I heard voices talking loudly, like there was a crowd of people inside the elevator. I was feeling relieved to hear people talking after my encounter from earlier. As the elevator came to a stop, I can hear the voices clearly, like as if there was a party going on inside. Ding! I watched as the elevator doors slide open. To my surprise, there was not a single person in sight and the voices went silent as an empty elevator stood before me. I almost choked on my fear, unable to scream or speak, as I rushed into the elevator with my cart. It was either the elevator or remain on the basement level, and I chose the elevator. Just get me out of here. I could hear my heart pounding loudly as the elevator ascended to the next floor. I finally made it to the medical surgical floor and rushed out as soon as the doors of the elevator opened. Ding! I saw the nurse's station in the distance and felt relieved finally. I pushed my cart down the hallway and made my way over to the nurse's station. Seeing the nurses working at the computers made me feel much better. It was so good to see people. One of the nurses looked at me and said, "How are you tonight?" I calmly responded, "I'm fine." The same nurse asked, "Are you sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." I screamed, "I did." All the nurses started laughing at me like I was joking. I seriously just wished they would have seen what I saw or heard. I knew they didn't believe me, so I just walked away calmly. I made my way over to the closet where I usually restock my cleaning supplies and opened the door with a key. It was dark inside, so I switched on the light and started restocking my cart. As I was bending over to dump the bucket of dirty water into the drain, I felt a cold chilly hand grasp my nape firmly. I reacted, shrieking hysterically as I dropped everything and ran down the hall back to the nurse's station. The nurses huddled around me and asked me if I was okay. Shaking and sweating, I responded, I need to go home. I'm not feeling too well. I left that night and had since then resigned from the night shift at the hospital. Hospitals are filled with wandering spirits and I refuse to work there ever again. Later on, I asked a lady in town whom has a sixth sense to look into what had happened to me that night. She told me that what I saw, heard, and felt was not of my imagination. She said those spirits whom I encountered may have forgotten to be careful around the living and may have exposed themselves a little too much. Spirits can sense fear, and when they do, they like to take advantage of the living. The lady told me not to worry anymore, as she had worked up some koob spells to ease my fear and protect me. I feel much better now and have gotten over those encounters from that night. Story 48, The Dead Boyfriend. There were two good guy friends who grew up together and have lots of things in common. The friends like the same style clothing, music, and women, etc. One day friend A and friend B both like the same girl C. Friend A ended up dating C for a little over a year, but unfortunately friend A passed away in a car accident. C was sad and lonely. Sometimes C would talk to herself of how lonely and sad she was. C wished that A would come back to visit her. Friend B thought he should comfort her because C was sad and needed a friend. Not too long, B started to see her more than just a friend, and C started to like him too. Friend B would visit her more often until one night when B took C out for a date. They were on their way home. C kept on staring at the passenger side mirror, and she had this shocking/frightening face expression, so B decided to ask her what was up, but she replied, "Oh, it's nothing." B just brushed it off and didn't bother to ask her more of it. The next night when B came to visit C again, and after leaving C's house, B was driving halfway home. All of a sudden out of nowhere, a black figure like a man popped out in front of B's car. B slammed on the brake, and there was a loud noise thump. B thought he hit someone or something and maybe his car was all damaged. He quickly got out of his car to have a look, but there was no one to be found. B's car wasn't damaged either. B knows what he had seen and what he hit was real, but he couldn't understand why he couldn't find anything, so he left home. That night B had a dream that his friend A came into his dream and was threatening him not to talk to his woman or next time A will really take B along with him. A says that it was A who popped in front of B's car, and that was just a sign for B to back off. B woke up in sweat and was really concerned about his dream about A's threat. That following afternoon, B went to visit C and told her about the dream and says that they should stop seeing one another. C told B that since he brought that up, C will tell B something. C says, "Remember that night when you took me home, and I kept looking at the passenger side mirror. I kept looking because A was crawling really fast after us." Story 49, Flowers on the Floor. Here's a true story that has haunted me till this day. Years ago, I was working as a security guard at a funeral home. This particular day was in March 2007, during a wake scheduled from noon to 9 p.m. Some lady had passed away, and there was a small gathering of people. Shortly after 9 p.m., everyone was gone except the funeral director, a clerk, and myself. After thoroughly checking all the rooms, the funeral director locked the two main viewing rooms. Then he and the clerk left. My shift ended at midnight, so I had to patrol the exterior rooms for a couple hours and lock up. If I needed to get into the main visitation room where the bodies were, I had to call the director. Anyway, I had been doing this for a couple weeks and gotten over most of the jitters. I was relaxing on a desk in the main hall, watching television when I heard a loud thump in the room the body was. Now on this night, there was only one viewing, and the casket was closed, and some flowers were placed on top before we locked the doors. When I heard the noise, I turned down the TV and listened intently for a long time. I heard a scratching sound, or at least it sounded like it, so I walked slowly to the double door and put my ear against it. I could hear something like footsteps or movement. It sounded like someone was walking around in the room. I thought maybe someone had been accidentally left behind, so I knocked on the door and asked if anyone was in there. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and then they seemed to come towards the door I was behind. I got really scared, so I backed up. The handle on the door started to move slightly, and that's when I took off. I ran until I reached a busy intersection and then called the funeral director. I told him something strange was happening in one of the visitation rooms, that I heard noises. I didn't say anything about the footsteps or the door handle. I didn't want to sound crazy. I just mentioned that there were noises. He told me to sit tight until he got there. I didn't want to go back, but I had to. After 20 minutes or so, he was on site, and we both went into the building. He walked to the visitation room with no fear and opened it. There was nothing there, but I did notice the bed of flowers that were on top of the casket was on the ground. The funeral director looked around and then picked up the flowers and put them back on the casket. Then we both left, and he locked it up again. I told him I didn't want this job anymore, and I was going to walk that night. He looked at me like I was crazy, but I left and never went back. Story 50. My husband always said he never believed in ghosts. He doesn't like to hear about it or talk about it. I always tell him that's a lie. I know he is, but he just doesn't want to show it. One Saturday night, I believe it was around like 7 p.m. The whole family was watching a movie in the living room. Me, my husband, and our 3 daughters, the youngest still a baby. After 30 minutes my husband said he was feeling tired, and so, he went upstairs to bed. Our living room is just below our bedroom, so if you're upstairs, you can still hear everyone from downstairs. After the movie was over, I went upstairs to get a blanket for my baby. Upon entering our bedroom, I saw my husband sleeping flat on his stomach with his legs spread apart, and his head facing the wall. The room was pitch dark. I didn't turn on the lights when I went in. I was sure he heard me walking in and out. Later that night I asked one of my daughters to go back upstairs to grab a pair of socks for my baby, because her feet was cold. I told her not to switch on the lights because Daddy was sleeping. She quickly ran upstairs and back down again. An hour or two I was feeling sleepy, so I decided that it was time for bed, and sent my daughters up to their rooms. After tucking my girls in bed, I went to our room. The lights were on and the door was open a little. My husband was lying sideways facing the wall. So I asked him why was the lights on. He looked at me in a really weird way, and this is what he said. Earlier when I came in the room he heard me. Then later when my daughter came in, he heard her too, but he didn't know who it was. He said he heard the door close, like the person had left, which she really did leave. Not even 5 minutes had passed since our daughter came upstairs. My husband said he had a feeling that someone was still in the room. He thought it was me, but he wasn't sure. Remember, he was still lying on his front and his legs were spread apart, and he was still facing the wall. He could hear the person's footsteps walking slowly to the end of the bed where his feet were, and sat down in between his legs. I asked him how did he know it sat down. He answered, because he felt the end of the bed went down as if someone sat down. Then whoever sat between his legs started bouncing slowly up and down, as if it was me bouncing my baby to sleep, like how I usually do. In his head he kept thinking it has to be me just trying to make my baby go to sleep. Usually I hum or sing softly, and I usually turn on the night light, but this person wasn't humming or sing at all. Plus if it was me trying to put my baby to sleep, why wasn't my baby making any noise? So he didn't move, he was frozen in fear. He could hear the TV on and my daughters talking and laughing, but he didn't hear my voice. He thought it had to be me that was sitting at the end of the bed, but he was not sure, so he kept listening to see if he was going to hear my voice. Then snap. He finally heard my voice telling my daughters to stop fighting. That's when he started freaking out. He hit his feet together as fast as he can to see if he could feel anyone, both didn't. He then ran to turn on the lights. He looked around the room, no one was in there with him, but himself. After looking around the room he just climbed back to bed with the lights on and left the door open a little. Then after a while I walked in and that's when he told me. Story 51, not everything should be said out loud. My mom told me this story growing up, and this story had always stuck to me. I know I'm missing some parts, but I'm going to go off based on what I remember. So if it doesn't make sense, apologies in advance. When my mom was around 12-13, she went to a Hmong funeral for a relative, I believe. It was a young girl who had died. I don't know if my mom knew her age exactly, but she said the girl wasn't even in her 20s yet. She heard a lot of relatives talk about this incident a couple of months after the funeral, which is why she knows and believes this story. Either it was some of the girl who died, guy friends that came or friends of a relative that came, and one of those guys had made a comment at the casket. Something like, "Damn girl, you're so fine, if you were still alive I'd FK you." Something very provocative and something you shouldn't even say at a funeral. After the funeral was all said and done for that day, the guy who said that was walking home with his buddies. They had left a bit early since they had to be up early to come help. Well, the guy who said the dumb thing kept hearing a female's voice by his ear saying, "Do it, come FK me," on their way home. He would turn around and his buddies would look at him confused, or laugh at him, and he'd ask them if they heard what he heard. They'd all ask what, to which he wouldn't say. When they got to the guy's house they were all drinking in his room. Night had came and as they were all going to leave, they started hearing a girl's voice saying the same thing again. "Come FK me, you said you would if I were alive, well now I'm here." They thought they were hearing things until the guy told them that was what he kept hearing on the way home, and that he was too scared to tell them. They kept hearing things and all freaked out, and didn't want to leave the room or the house anymore. They kept hearing tapping on the window and as if someone was trying to get in his room, twisting the locked doorknob. This went on for how long, but long enough to where they decided to call the shaman who was at the funeral. They explained what was going on and the shaman came with a peach branch, and some other things. I don't remember much, but I remembered the peach branch part. When the shaman came, he immediately knew something was very wrong in the house. My mom said the shaman could feel the presence of whatever was there. As he got to the guy's room, he started doing his ritual and tried to talk to the girl. The girl explained what had happened. She was so mad and upset the guy would even say something like that, especially at her funeral. In return, she was going to take him for saying that to teach him a lesson. From what my mom was told, the shaman had to convince the girl to go in peace and to forgive the guy for being so foolish. If he didn't, he'd have no choice but to kill her. Which wasn't easy to convince the girl's spirit. She was very upset, and from my understanding, she has every right to be upset. After the whole ordeal, the shaman had scolded the guy, and they had to change his name in order to prevent her from finding him again. She told me she saw the guy again after everything happened and that he was never the same again. He wasn't the annoying loud guy she knew from the funeral anymore, and that he became very introverted and quiet. At the event he just sat by his family, and didn't even acknowledge anyone else. This will always be a reminder to me that not everything should be said out loud, and to watch what I say out loud. Story 52. In a village in Laos lived a boy named View. View was an orphan and both of his parents died of sickness. Being the orphan, View's job was to guard the cattle grazing in the fields. One day View's uncle came and told him that there has been a few tiger attacks near a village next to them and told him to be on alert. View, being strong-hearted, didn't think too much of it. When night came around, all you heard were the crickets and the calm winds. As night fell, View was just about done eating and getting ready for bed, all sudden he heard the cattle mooing back and forth. View grabbed his rifle and charged outside. From a distance he saw an animal on 4 legs and a black figure standing next to it. With fear running through his body, View discharged his rifle, hitting the four-legged animal. As it ran, it made an screeching noise that can be heard for miles. View then ran towards the village, scared for his life for what he had just encountered. As View approached the village, he screamed, "Help! Tiger, tiger, tiger!" With all the commotion, View awoken up everyone. As View reached his house, many villagers were behind him asking, "What's wrong, View?" Running out of breath, View explained what had happened. "As I was preparing for bed, the cattle started acting weird, out of the ordinary. So I took my rifle and ran outside to check out what it was. As I approached the gates, I saw an animal on four legs and in black figured standing next to it." The villagers was shocked at what they had just heard and didn't believe him, so the village mayor gathered a few village elder and a shaman armed with rifles and crossbows set off to the fields where View was staying at. Now, to get to the fields, you had to walk 4 miles out of town and then hike a small hill. Down below was View's uncle's hut, and next to it was the wooden fence where the cattle was gathered. As the group headed up the hill and reached the top, they told each other to observe the fields. As one of the village elder peered off to the distance, he noticed a black figure peeping out of the wooded forest. As the elder told the group to look, everyone was shocked with fear running through their bodies. They turned and ran back to the village. Within the next few days, a couple families have moved out of the village, fearing whatever the elders saw might come into the village and terrorize the families. Every night around the village you would hear dogs barking. View was petrified for his life, being the one who shot at the four-legged animal. On the 5th night, as View was in his room, he heard someone knocking at his window. "View, are you sleeping?" View's house wasn't a typical straw house, for his uncle was wealthy. Their house was made out of bricks and the window had gates around it to protect from robbers. View didn't answer whoever called out for View. As morning came, one of the family who lived in the village screamed, and as villagers raced to the house, they saw a lifeless body of a young boy who was in his mother's arm crying for help. Nobody couldn't do nothing. As they did a shaman, it turned out that whatever that killed the young boy was back for vengeance. Fear ran through the village like wildfire. The villagers were angry and scared. One of the elders said, "View, this is your fault. We should just tie you to a tree and let that thing come and get you." Following that night, the villagers took View and tied him against a tree. Saddened by this, View cried and cried. As night came and the crickets sounded the calm night, View fell asleep. But that didn't last too long. Out of nowhere, dogs around the village started barking hysterically. Families rushed to blow out their fire and headed to bed. As time went by, View started to see a black figure walking around houses, with its body crouched over. As an old lady, View screamed, "Help, Dab! Help, Dab!" But there was nobody helping. As the figure came closer towards View, the scent of rotting flesh arose the air. At this point, View could see the face of this figure. With maggots coming out of the mouth, View fainted. Closer and closer as the figure came, it reached View, but as soon as she reached View, the figure was met with pain. Somehow the figure couldn't touch View, as if something was blocking View. With anger, the figure made a screeching sound that could be heard throughout the village. All of a sudden, the figure that had terrorized the whole village dropped to its knees, and as it hit the ground, its skin turned into a rotting liquid and its clothing turned into leaves. As View slowly awoken, but yet a bit still unconscious, he heard a faded voice. "My orphan son, how can such people do this to you? Don't be scared of me. I'm sorry I brought you into this life to suffer such a horrible life. I miss you and love you dearly. I'll always be beside you." With tears, View awoken. Niam. Looking around, he didn't see anyone. Story 53. This is a story about something I experienced at a security job I used to work at, known to be St. Catherine University, which is known to be an all-girls private school with some exception for males through the master's program. As a security officer, you had to ensure the campus was safe and all that nonsense, with buildings being patrolled constantly as well securing doors. And of course, I had to work the overnight shifts, which was typically 6 p.m. 6 a.m. Luckily that night, I didn't have to lock up any buildings, I just had to patrol the majority of them. I patrolled a ton of buildings that night already and eventually realized that I forgot to finish my safety assignment, which was when you had to check all the fire extinguishers from top to bottom. For the month of February 2005, I was assigned Mendel Hall, which was known to be the building where the science students studied human anatomy, biology, chemistry, and all those typical things. There was rumors from one of the overnight custodians that there used to be paranormal activity happening in one of the rooms on the 4th floor of Mendel Hall, of which the school had to ask the bishop and another priest to come bless the place, because that was where many people experiencing weird sightings of dead bodies waking up from the dead. I laughed it off and told the custodian that I probably would never see those bodies anyways, since I don't think a fire extinguisher was in any of those rooms anyways. Of course, I didn't think too much of it and eventually finished the majority of the assignment already. Up until I came across the 4th floor that night, I only had one fire extinguisher to check left before I could head back across campus to the office where my other partner was waiting for me to get back. I was so tired that night that I was so ready to just head back to the office and kick my feet up and end the night, but I had to finish this assignment quickly before I could do so. Funny thing was that the fire extinguisher list had room numbers labeled on it, but the stinky part was that the rooms in the hallways were getting renumbered, so that meant that they didn't have their original numbers. I spent a good 10 minutes going from room to room looking for the last stupid fire extinguisher and still couldn't find it until I realized that I hadn't checked the rooms behind the double doors that looked like it was one of those emergency room doors at the hospital. I had never gone back there before since I started working. I swiped my ID on the card reader and opened the door. As I got in, I noticed there were 4 classrooms with single doors. They all also had card readers on it. I looked around for a bit and noticed that the lights were flickering in the room closest to my left. I stood there for a bit confused and wondered if the custodian was trying to mess with me, since he usually left the lights on in the 1SF floor of the basement a couple of times. I radioed my coworker and informed him that lights were flickering in one of the locked rooms at Mendel and that I was going to check it out. Again, I scanned my ID and entered the room with my flashlight in hand. Before I turned on the light switch on my left-hand side, I noticed this weird smell. It had this smell of blood or something of that sort. You know, like some sort of dry blood smell when your nose bleeds. I didn't think too much of it until I turned on the light and looked straight ahead. There was a whole classroom of body bags on silver rolling stretchers. I immediately dropped my flashlight and was shocked that there were actually bodies in the room. I quickly bowed down and told the bodies I was sorry for disturbing their rest and turned my face left, to which I finally found the fire extinguisher I was looking for. I quickly marked my initials on it and exited the room immediately and ran all the way down to the entrance door on the 1st floor. Then suddenly I heard this weird voice say something. "Hey you." I turned around quick to look around and ran as fast as I could back to the security office. It was about 3:20 a.m. Everything was fine and normal up until that time. I was finally able to kick up my feet on the table and sit down for a good chunk of time. Shortly after, my coworker told me that he was going to go out and patrol the campus in the squad vehicle. I told him that he was good to go and to radio me if he saw something suspicious. He then left. After about 20 minutes later, I felt this weird cold chill pass through me for a bit, and my body started to shiver from it. I knew that something wasn't right since there was no A/C in the unit. I got up immediately and looked around my perimeter. I grabbed my baton out of my holster and released it. I also busted out my golden crucifix on my necklace given by my mother and guarded my position till my coworker came back. Later that morning, after I got off from work, I went home, took a shower, and brushed my teeth before knocking out on my bed. During my sleep, I had this weird dream. I was in a garden trying to protect these young kids from a mysterious man whom bothered them a lot, and they didn't like it. As I tried to confront the guy, he had his back turned away from me. I tapped him on the shoulder to get his attention. He then immediately turned his whole front face towards me and spoke something in Japanese. My gosh! His face was so dark with some scars and a white mustache. He looked like he was in his late 50s. His face woke me up immediately, and I jumped up out of my bed. It was only 8:25 a.m. in the morning. I was so scared that I didn't go to sleep at all that day till my mom woke up. I told my mom that I had a bad dream about some Japanese dude scared me in my dream. My mom thought I was just playing around and laughed it off, but then when I told her that I had previously saw bodies before I came home, she immediately gave me a rosary and told me to put it under my pillow before I went to bed that night. I did that. Never had a scary experience again. Story 54, South Hall UW River Falls. I'm a student at UW River Falls, and I do work study as a student custodian. I heard from my friends telling me that a long time ago there was a Hmong girl who got possessed in Crabtree Hall, and a shamanic ceremony was performed there. If that story is true or not, because I find it strange for a university to even allow rituals to be performed on campus. Anyways, I just want to share my spooky story I encountered. I work my hours from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. in the South Hall building. I was all alone by myself. I also have a team member, but she was absent. It was around 7:30 p.m. I was mopping the stairs on the second floor, and I heard chairs and desk moving. I ignored it because I assumed that there are still students here. It was 9:45 p.m., and getting dark outside. I was in a classroom on second floor wiping down each individual student chair desks. All of a sudden I heard desk and chairs moving around like they were in a battle. It was a mild sound. I ignored because I just think it's nothing, and I might just be hearing white noise. It was getting close for my shift to get done, and I was in the elevator with my cleaning cart. South Hall had a 3rd floor that has been shut down for a really long time. It was said that ever since there was a death of a construction guy, that elevator will never go up to 3rd floor, even when the buttons were pressed on. I do not recall if it was a suicide or accidental death. While in the elevator I'm waiting to go back to the first floor, the elevator would not budge open. I pressed the button to open the door, and it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. So I pushed all the floor buttons 12 and 3, to see if it would do anything. The elevator brought me up to 2nd floor and the door opened. I thought about trying again to go back for 1st floor. I let the door closed, and the elevator cannot go to 3rd floor, so it went down to 1st floor. Also the 3rd floor button does not even light up. I was back to the first floor and the door still did not budge. So I pressed 2, and then 1 again and see if it'll bring me back down. I was brought back down, then I hit all 3 buttons. All of a sudden the 3rd floor button lit up. I was scared because of the story that I heard about the tragic death. I have so many thoughts in my mind, like what if his spirit is here? And you would not believe it. The elevator took me to the 3rd floor, but the door did not budge open. I stayed inside for about 20-30 seconds, and I heard a constant light tap on the door. As if someone is tapping the window with their fingers. I shut my eyes really tight, because I was afraid what if I actually see something. I prayed to God to please take me away from here and to help protect me from any evil spirit. The elevator went down to first floor, and the door opened. It was 9:57 p.m. at that time. I quickly put my cart away down the hall, and ran back to my dorm as fast as I could, and hid under my blankets and went to sleep. Story 55, the bathroom downstairs in a Hmong funeral. This funeral home is located in Arcade Street. It was about 11:55 p.m., almost midnight to 12:00 am. This time everyone left already. Only immediate families were here, and just 4-6 of my Keej buddies left playing Keej UASI. I really needed to go use the bathroom, and ask one of my friend to go. We both went downstairs where the bathroom was. Straight down is where the women bathroom is. Take a right and down the hall is the men bathroom. To your left is a door, and that door is a room where they meet and talk. We got down there and no one is in the women's bathroom, and no one was also in the men's bathroom. We finished our business and came back up. Just when we were coming upstairs halfway the stairs, we both saw this white figure past us to the door. The door wasn't opened, it was like the white figure went through and vanished. We both stopped and looked at each other. My buddy said, "Do you want to check who it is?" I said no, and let's just go. He didn't care and went to knock on the door, but nobody answered. Usually the Augs would come and open the door, but it was silent. I said let's go, but I wasn't scared. I didn't feel anything. I tried not to scare myself at that time. My buddy wasn't scared either. Ever since then, I don't use the bathroom late at night or alone. Thank you for always supporting the channel and welcoming its videos. Wishing you good health and remember to subscribe to the channel to reach 1,000 subscribers.